All right, now I take it we is live. Ya salam. Right, just gonna do a quick sound check as always. Make sure the volume is coming through loud and clear. Let me just put this. All right, so إن الحمد لله وكفاه والصلاة والسلام على رسوله المصطفى وعلى عباده الذين ارتضى ومن بهداهم اهتدى وبآثار أهل المدينة اقتفى وبعد فسلام الله على القوم. مرحبا أهلا وسهلا people, welcome back. All right, so I can see Thinker, Nora, أهلا وسهلا, shukran. Scorpio, Ayub al-Maliki, Claire, you're doing it, people. You're doing it. Some of you awake at this godly hour, shall I say. Allahu Akbar. So, what a day it's been as well. Ya salam. Right. I thought, amongst many topics, why not the topic of the vicissitudes of fate? Allah. تقلبات الزمن. That how there's a rhythm to it, isn't it, in Arabic? تقلبات الزمن. Or how time, the kind of rotations of it, if you like, not in the physics sense, although we can as well, but in a kind of destiny sense. So yeah, so we'll do that. Whilst I bring up just the slides, you guys know the drill, people, the usual, spread the love. Let me just bring up the file for today. Right, meanwhile, you guys can click like and share and get this out there. All right, so where are we at here? We're taking a look. We've got, right, these are open. And this, nope, that's not it. Right, that's a much older. Okay, closer, February. Okay, March. Here we are, people. All right. So, how did the date not change? Ya salam. So, the date was supposed to change, but anyway. Right, people, the vicissitudes of fate. And we'll take a look at some of Quranic ayat about that. And I didn't get to cover the story of Abu Muslim Al-Khurasani. And I thought, what an excellent time to cover that, especially since um, in many ways his story reflects the vicissitudes of fate, of how things, I guess there's highs, there's lows, there's peaks and troughs, and just, I guess, losses and wins in life, and how in one way it is the story of creation, ultimate creation, and we are just a tiny pixel in this huge, colossal piece of art. So, right, let me just take a look who we have online before we get into that. Right. So, Fahad Alam, you're doing it. Shukran, much love. Hair looking on point. Shukran. I hope so. It's like at some point you're like, I don't even know what to do with this. It's like, just keep it short and just, yeah. So, right, what is going on? I love these stories. In these stories, we find strength, we find courage, we find heritage, we find struggles, successes, we find icons, and in many ways kind of role models, I guess, even though it's a different time, it's a different world, I guess, but still there's an individual struggle that is the archetype of struggle, and we identify with that. So yeah, and it's a great way to get people to learn about characters and eras and certain, like a historic era within Islam, by you acquaint yourself with certain people and it comes to life. You see, for me, I think the stories have always been incredibly powerful, and it's something that for me made it come to life. When I would try to learn about, let's say I want to learn about a particular scholar in Islam, what I would do, especially in the past when I used to study systematic, when I was in my studies, I would always, like, let's say I've got a book. This book is by I don't know, this book is by Bakr ibn al-Arabi. Now, I may have heard of, but Bakr ibn al-Arabi is a huge example. I mean, he's a huge figure and with so much about him, but sure, you could take him as an example. Now, what I would do is I would first of all, okay, I've got the book. This is what the book is about. But what about him? Now, most Arabic books, the classical Islamic literature, it comes nowadays with like a whole gateway section. So this kind of, it's like an orientation. So before you get to the book, there's an entire kind of a preamble. This whole, it's before the introduction to the book. So it will say, first of all, the editor will say why they, brought this book back and why they thought it was a great choice. And then they will go into who the author was, his story. They will often go into his era, in what era, what political kind of things were going on during this person's time, who were his teachers, his students, something about him, what other books did he author. They will kind of go into all of this, and sometimes, depending on some books, they may even give you a bit about the discussion of this book, who else has authored on this book. So you get this huge orientation before you've even begun the book. And even if you didn't, I'm just saying, it's brought to you, it's at your doorstep. Sometimes that's not the case, and I would always try to find that about these people, and I'll try to let them come alive for me. So I'd learn about them. Okay, what did he do when he grew up here? And I would think in my mind, what era is that? And who else is alive in that time that's also huge? So I might think, so Abu Bakr ibn Arabi's, he's the, okay, this is the kind of time, okay, Imam Ghazali exists. Okay, who else? And I might think, well, okay, Qadi Iyad exists, Ibn Rushd, the grandfather. You've got, so I'm thinking of people and I'm kind of connecting them. And so what it does is, in your mind, you kind of make these maps. So, and also, where are they in the world? So I would kind of situate them in this mental map. So they are in Spain. Okay. Abu Bakr ibn Arabi is an exceptional example, because he is one of those few people that actually wrote journals. I mean, he went out of his way to kind of, provide like almost medieval, what can we say, like insta posts. So he would write about things that are going on. He would say things like, oh, on such and such date I was passing through Baghdad and I saw this. And now you've got almost 900 years later a snapshot and a window into that time. And he gives fascinating stories, and he'll say all sorts. Like he'll say things like, it was Molid, for example, and I was in Damascus, and this was going on, and he doesn't sometimes pass judgment, so it's not clear from just his descriptive side where he stands on that issue, and that is also speaks volumes, because he's not getting emotional, because sometimes he doesn't agree with the issues, but when he describes them, he's describing them so pleasantly that you would think, okay, so what's his take on it? But he's just so detached and just descriptive, and he says amazing things. I'll tell you, since we've started on Bakr ibn Arabi, he has one in one of his journals, and I think some people have tried to collate some of them, but they haven't collected them all. So scattered throughout his major works, he will just randomly throw in a journal edition. So he'll just kind of just say, oh, and on this date of this month I did this, and it may have some connection to, for example, the hadith he's giving a commentary on. And on one of them he speaks about Damascus. So whilst he's in Damascus, so the thing about Bakr ibn Arabi, as a young man, he kind of travels all around a huge part of the Muslim world. So he kind of goes through. His father is a political kind of envoy, so he kind of tags along and he travels through parts of Spain, and he always hears this glory from the east. So it's amazing, because you see, it's how reputation, I guess, kind of carries off. So he'd always held Abul Walid al-Baji in awe, who was a generation before him, or a generation and a half almost before him. But he's somebody that leaves Muslim Spain, goes off for over a decade to the east, does all these studies. He's a huge Maliki. He comes back to Spain. Abul Walid al-Baji, he's known as al-Baji, and there, when he comes back, he hears of this phenomenon of Ibn Hazm, who has kind of wreaked havoc on the Malikis, and then he goes toe to toe with and butts head with Ibn Hazm, and they have all these debates. Unfortunately, their debates are not actually documented. Such a shame. But what is documented is that they had so many debates, and Ibn Hazm says that I finally he kind of concedes to having met his match. He says that nobody did stand in front of me, because Ibn Hazm in debating was just a phenomenon that could not be rivaled. And so he says that there was nobody that could, be an impediment to the force I brought. He says, and the Malikiya did not produce anybody. Ibn Hazm. Huh? He goes, they didn't produce anybody that could do that until Abul Walid al-Baji re-entered Al-Andalus. And he comes back, and he's this... he's a force to be reckoned with, incredibly sharp. And he puts Ibn Hazm, it's difficult to say. In the books, they don't give the debates, which is such a shame, but they say that they both kind of won some, lost some, but it was not, it was like it's the kind of, it was a force, an unstoppable force that met an immovable object, if you like, and this was it, the showdown. So this personality always strikes awe in all the Andalusis that come after him, and they want to be like him. So they want to go off and study, and Ibn Arabi gets that opportunity, but he writes these things, then journals, as he goes off. And So in Damascus, as I was saying, he mentions that he was hosted at the home of some, um, I take it like some wealthy person that kind of saw him and invited him to some meal. And he describes that in this person's house, in their home, they had so this large seating area, and they had like a small stream, like probably I'm assuming, maybe like just half a meter in kind of width. And this stream of water, like a moat, it kind of encircled this seating area, and it had a veil, a curtain on one side, and the stream obviously is coming through, and then it had a curtain on the other side and the stream. And he said what they would do is people in on the other part of the of the house, they would put dishes and food and drink and tray on trays and allow it to just come through this stream as they sat there, and they would just take things at their leisure, and just kind of once they finished with them, they would just put them back on the stream, and the stream would just that's fantastic when you think about it. This is 900 years ago, and so things like this give you a portal into their world, and it's amazing. And we have to one of the days go through Abu Bakr ibn Arabi's stories, because he goes through a hell of a lot with his journey, and he documents. So there's this huge story of him getting shipwrecked, and they get shipwrecked near Egypt, I believe, and um, I'm not sure whether it's Alexandria or wherever, but they're placed with these refugees, and he speaks of how he kind of obviously just a nobody amongst these refugees, how he sees one of these kind of chieftains, if you like, of this whole area, like a somebody that playing a game of chess, and we've got to cover that story sometime. And he goes and he stands, a few people standing by these two who are like these kind of almost like the oligarchs of that region. So these people are sitting there playing chess, and some people are watching, and there's this refugee site not so far off, and he's wandered along, and he ends up there, and he starts watching, and he sees that so what happens is it's a tense game, and this major figure, this kind of chief person, he he's about to make a move, and he makes a different, like he's about to move something, and then he moves. I've forgotten. We'll have to bring I don't know if he recalls the exact piece, but he makes a move in chess, and Abu Bakr ibn Arabi speaks out like he's a kid I think he may be like 16 or something. So he says, he says he's even more intelligent. Like he makes a comment that he's even more strategic than than anyone can believe. Like he makes a comment that, wow, that what a strategy. And you see, even the guy who moves the piece, he gets like, he's thinking, what has this guy seen that I haven't seen? So it's amazing that you see he catches the attention of this person, so he's really intrigued by him, and then he kind of earns his favor, and that guy after the game calls him and says, what did you see? Like, what did I do? What was it that was so impressive? And then he explains, and see, it just goes back to fate, I guess, how it ties into today's topic in some way, in many ways, that you see a skill or some knowledge or something we harbor and harness never goes to waste. And here Abu Bakr ibn Arabi's mastery over chess in in a ruined state as a kind of refugee turns the tables for him. and where he then finds this element of success, whilst from um, a position of from a destitute position. So it's incredible that how, and it's all really about perspective, how you see things. Uh, Shukran Azarati, much love for the super chat. Mufti Salam from H Town. Just wanted to say I took the example of being steadfast in a decision. The bit about ek baar jab mind bana दूं तो फिर मैं अपने आप की भी नहीं सुनता. Shared it with a close friend. Yeah, sometimes we need that in life. And you see, things are going to happen anyway. Gold Globe, shukran, much love for the super chat. It's like I was watching this kind of like a short clip on social media, and somebody says, well, they're considering to do something in that particular case, and this applies to anything, but in that particular case, they were talking about some kind of a degree or something, a kind of profession qualification. And they said, well, how long is it going to take? And said, well, 4 years. I said, I ain't got 4 years. In 4 years' time, I'll be 35 years old. So, I don't have that. And the person said, well, in 4 years' time, you're going to be 35 anyway. You might as well be 35 with with the direction and profession and skill in which you're progressing. Because people often forget that, and we're all victims to this, that we forget that, well, God willing, we're going to be that anyway. We're going to be there anyway. Why not be there with this adage? So, and people, so it's just, salam. We are all a part of that, I guess, You see, there's risks in everything. There's, it's incredibly hard and difficult to do certain things. Sometimes you don't want to do them. It's easier to just be chilling. It's easier to just be, it's difficult work to try to succeed in something, and this applies to us all. But what we forget often is it's even more difficult failing. If you think winning's tough, wait till you got to lose. So that's incredibly tough. It's all kind of difficult business. So people think, well, this is risky, and I don't know, maybe I should invest my time in this, or invest my money in this, or invest, do this. This is difficult, or this is too strenuous, or this is too risky, or this is too. But then failing and losing, and that's that's so much more difficult. But yeah, may Allah make it easy. Right, so yeah, and so much studying can be done these days online as well. Absolutely. And I think, Mufti, can you do the story of Ibn Fahad traveled? Oh, Ibn Fadlan. Yeah, we can do that as well someday. That's an interesting one as well. That you could just watch the movie as well. But and it's not about just, I'm not just talking about academic pursuits, because I'm talking about you, whatever you need, self-tailored, whatever you want, whatever betters you, a betterment, progression, gradual progression towards a desired goal. That is success. It's not So for somebody, it may not be about doing a degree. That may not be their thing. They may want to learn a skill. Somebody may want to learn coding or want to improve on art or poetry or a language or electronics or in IT or whatever. Somebody might want to. It's not for some people. It is academic. It's like learning a degree because it's going. For some people, it's more, and some people it's just their own thing. And for some people, I think this is really important. It's just overcoming the obstacles of life. That is the ultimate success for some. And that life in itself has maybe weighed down so heavily on certain people. It's not their fault. Life can come crashing down on any one of us. And but being able to rise from the ashes, that is enough for certain people. There's in line with today, let me just, I thought in line with this, always let's begin with a quote from Maulana that it's that whatever you lost through fate, be certain that it saved you from pain. That's an incredibly profound message from the perspective that, you see, once you have lost something, then what's your narrative? What's your script when you lose something in fate? Because we're all going to inevitably face some difficulties, some more than others, but we're all going to get a fair share of difficulties in life. The grass is always greener. People go through tragedies. Recently, there was a very famous Bollywood singer, Lata Mangeshkar, who passed away. And at a very senior age, I've forgotten how old she was. She may have been, I don't know, I think maybe 90 or at least late 80s, but she was quite old and lived an incredibly illustrious and successful, glamorous life from the perspective of fame. And anybody who somewhat is familiar with the world of Bollywood has heard the name of Lata Mangeshkar. Now, you could see that. So there was this clip when she passed away on social media. A lot of people were sharing clips, and there was this clip, and that somebody had asked her, and they, as presumably Hindu, they believe in reincarnation. So somebody had asked her that when you are born again, who or what would you like to be born as? Who would you like to be born as? And this isn't about the creed. I mean, this isn't about just, it's about the message. She said that, I wouldn't like another birth at all. And the reporter said, really? And she said, yeah. And she said, and if it must, then not as Lata Mangeshkar. And the reporter kind of just says, no, come on, really? Like, you're this famous celebrity. It's like you wouldn't want to. And she just said that. She said, well, the suffering that, she said, Lata Mangeshkar has had to bear, only she knows in private. And it was just very hard hitting. That it doesn't matter who you see, they will have their fair share of struggle, difficulty, challenges in this life. So some more than others, but everybody will get it. Nobody is exempt. Everybody is on this path of suffering, but it's how we see it. You see the story. Things happen. There's a tragedy befalls you. There's something happens to you. You lose something. Especially now this quote. You see, it's the script, the meaning. Now this quote that whatever you lost through fate, be sure that it saved you from pain. Now, this is obviously in terms of possession, in terms of maybe relationships, in terms of maybe entrepreneurial enterprises, businesses. This would cover all of that kind of stuff because it's your story and it works and it allows you to kind of move forward. And I thought another important thing is perspective because it shapes everything. It's like that saying that the way I see it, we're all in the gutter, but some of us are looking at the stars. It's like we're all lying in the gutter, but some of us are just like, God, what a starry night. Perspective. So how you see things. And I thought, what an amazing, awe-inspiring poem. That तूफान कर रहा था मेरे अज़म का तवाफ, दुनिया समझ रही थी कि कश्ती भंवर में है. Allah. He said, the storm was doing tawaf around my ship. The storm was doing tawaf around my determination. Allah. To the onlookers, they thought my ship was caught in a storm. वाह, तूफान कर रहा था मेरे अज़म का तवाफ, दुनिया समझ रही थी कश्ती भंवर में है. That it really is perspective, isn't it? That when you think about it, because from that perspective, like you just take a look at this poem, because the ship is going down. I mean, it's in a storm. People can see it. It's been caught in this storm. It's it's got this whirlwind and it's trapped, and that is what it is. But yet the poet is saying that, oh, you think this is caught in a storm? No. The storm is simply doing tawaf to my courage. What a guy, huh? What a guy. Perspective. And I think that's the most important message. This is a message that we see time and time again in the Quran as well. And I want to, on today's lesson, pick up on some of that Quranic guidance. But yeah, let's see what some of you are saying in your comments. So, Mufti, any chance of you getting on the Maliki Madhab Bangladesh channel to teach them a thing or two about the madhab? Sure. I mean, why not? Why not? I mean, I do have, I do intend to do certain things. I'm just trying to think on the Maliki Madhab. Let's hope, sooner than later. I mean, we're all human. That's true. Suffering. Yeah. I think this is what Revan is saying. That's true. Suffering is inevitable. It is indeed. Based on that, let me just plug this in one sec. All right. So, you see, there was something I was watching, and it you see, it ties in very well to this. And also, we just did a book lounge meetup on Monday night. We reviewed the book, The Joy of Pain. Now, is very interesting discussion. I love the discussion, by the way. The discussion was just epic. If you haven't watched it, do check it out. It's on my channel. It's called The Joy of Pain Book Lounge. I think session 5 was it. But so incredible. Talking about Schadenfreude, which is the feeling pleasure in the misery of others. And it's really interesting because, wait there, I've got the book here actually. If I can just get this. There it is. So I do cover it in The Joy of Pain by Richard H. Smith, Schadenfreude and the Dark Side of Human Nature. And it's a very, it's a well worth reading it. Some of it is repetitive, and definitely if you watch the book review, we discuss it. And I love the way the author brings up, he's tackling this emotion, this dark emotion, that we as humans, what he's getting at is we have a fundamental emotion to hate, but we don't want to own up to it. And maybe we see, and we do find pleasure in the misery of people, but the question is, why do we find it? And he's tackling that because there's elements of superiority maybe we see in people, and when we see them suffering, it brings this kind of joy to us. And that in Arabic is called shumata. There's a word for it in Arabic. In English, there is no word. It borrows the word from German, Schadenfreude. And people will never admit to having Schadenfreude. Seldom, because we find it so despicable to admit to that. And I found that such a so profound. And he goes through examples. He'll highlight things, and just these kind of axioms, these rules that we have that we won't admit to. For example, it's not enough that we succeed, but others too must fail. That it's not just that we succeed, but others must fail. Amazing side to insan, huh? As insan fluctuates between the highs and the lows. And yeah, and it's and how that also ties into, it's not the same as envy, but it ties into, and maybe a kind of, it may tie into envy. Sometimes it doesn't have to tie into envy. It could be about you just don't like someone, or maybe somebody said something about you, or maybe there's some kind of competition, rivalry between you. Maybe it's low level, and people seek pleasure in in seeing that somebody else is now suffering. Yeah, fascinating. And I did in line with that, there's another book from the essays of William Hazlitt called The Pleasures of Hating, or something like that. And it's a small essay in his, I've got it here somewhere as well. And he cites in that, it's incredibly fascinating. He says that love with a little indulgence gives way to love with a little indulgence turns to indifference or even disgust. Hate alone is immortal. That is so profound, when you think about it. Because what he's trying to say is that what he feels, and that's Hazlitt, that the only emotion that is categorical and you have no doubt about it is hate. Because he's saying, well, if you love someone, you can have some doubt about it. And if you're, there's different emotions. You can say, yeah, I like it. Yeah, I kind of like it. Or yeah, I'm not so. Yeah, no, I do love the, but But if you hate someone, there's no doubt. Incredible, honestly. That love with a little indulgence turns to indifference or even disgust. Because it's true, once you love can become satiated or become desensitized, it can turn to indifference or even disgust sometimes. And hate alone is immortal. I thought that's so profound. I did discuss in our book lounge that sometimes I feel that there's, stemming from enantiodroma, that there is maybe these are love and hate, maybe two sides to the same coin at a kind of deep unconscious substrate, that they are maybe the same force but varying manifestations of it. I wonder if that, because to me, because from the enantiodroma we can see that love can turn to passionate hate, and sometimes obstinate, reckless hate can dynamically turn to maniacal love. So yeah, interesting, people, interesting. um for the people asking about would a straight rip from meaning of MALM work, yeah, let's just do that. I think we need to do that. Imran Khan, that was a fun discussion. It definitely was. Why do we glorify, romanticize our history so much? Sayyida, take it. Sayyida Fatima, shukran. Dearly appreciate the super chat. Question is interesting. Why do we glorify, romanticize our history so much? You see, I guess in some ways it could be, it's like a double-edged blade, that history, I think it's not just us. I think us here signifies the human species, because that's what it is. Human beings, we do glorify. And as they say, even that nostalgia always appears so much more romantic to us. That this is true, isn't it? Just if one thinks back even to themselves, they may think, oh yeah, my childhood, yeah, but maybe their childhood was a nightmare. But anything in hindsight always appears with a filter of a kind of romanticized nostalgia, a longing. Surprisingly, even though it may be horrible, the great Arabic poet Abu al-Atahiya, he says, رب يوم بكيت منه فلما سرت في غيره بكيت علي. Wow. I learnt that poem when I was in Pakistan. Studying, which is probably about, I think I learnt that probably about 23 years ago. So that he says, Rubba yomin, that how many a day, bakaitu minhu, that that made me cry. Falamma, but when, sirtu fi ghayrihi bakaitu ali, that when I got moved on, I then cried over those days. That first, like so many, like countless days I cried because of. only to later cry over. Like, as in, I strangely, ironically, somehow longed for them. Maybe this explains insan's twisted, inseparable relationship to suffering. Maybe it's a sadomasochistic kind of tendency that insan bears, that they, you know, they have this love-hate relationship with pain and suffering. In some ways you can think about it in a low level, very low level. Sometimes you might have a very small, nothing dangerous, but like a small pain, like let's say something, I don't know, like if you touched a part, it like hurt, but then you might not, so long as it's not very serious, but then you might get people, they themselves, they might touch it every now and then. Or I guess, and at a very, another further abstraction at a lower level is like an itch. I'm to scratch, and it gives a pleasure. So it's interesting. This insan's inseparable bond with kind of, I don't know, sadomasochistic kind of undertones in their instincts. Could be. Right. Salam, brothers and sisters. I lost my mother this week. Nas inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. May Allah grant her an elevated maqam in Jannatul Firdaus. May He grant you and your family ease. Ameen. One thing it's really important to know is that it is people, when they pass from this world, believe me, they are in bliss. The world that goes on, it's a very blissful place. It's not, this realm, we can't truly grasp it, and there's a fear of the unknown. But yeah, people that move on, it is, we have to know that they are in a better place. And as difficult as that is, but we have to kind of know it. On that note, I'd like to say as well that this is more a cultural thing, and I could be, and in fact, I'm putting it to you guys, like, because maybe I don't know, this may be a perspective that doesn't really resonate. So I wonder what you guys feel about this. I think from the element of kind of cultural appropriation and cultural sensitivities, you see, in English and in this culture, I don't know, when a person has passed, I don't think, like in Arabic, let's say, it resonates with, especially with, because Islam is in Arabic, and Islam is kind of the fabric of the Arabic speaking, the Arabosphere, especially, mostly everybody's Muslim in the Arabic speaking world. And even in other languages like Urdu and whatever, this kind of texture has been absorbed into the language as well, and the psychosocial understanding, that when people pass away, they ask for forgiveness. Now, I don't know, like in English, I don't see, and this is where I wonder what your thoughts are on this, that does it carry an adverse kind of reaction? Because you see, in generally, people don't, this is when somebody's passed away and somebody says, oh, may God forgive them. It comes across as though they were some kind of major perpetrator. And it doesn't come across to me when I read it as the way it does in Arabic, like غفر الله له, or Allah maghfirat kare. Like it doesn't in English, it comes across as though, oh, why what did the person do? Were they some kind of a criminal? Or whereas in English, to just pray for mercy for the person, I would assume makes a lot more sense in the psychosocial zeitgeist of the English language. So when somebody has passed and you say something like, may God bless her soul, may God bless her afterlife, may God, may she rest in peace, may she find eternal bliss, may these things resonate. When I read sometimes, because I've read on certain posts, something's happened and people will, obviously from the Muslim angle, some people will just write, oh, may Allah forgive him. And then sometimes I've even seen other people, maybe especially not Muslims, then wonder, like, forgive him for what? Like, what did the person do before they died? And it made me think as well that, I don't feel the connotations carry across in English. So I wonder what you guys feel about that as well. Yeah, so I don't know, that's my thought, that in English it would be better to, because it's always better to give the language you're using, that it carries those connotations, that the language is used in that way. And so this is how I've seen on certain things on social media. Somebody passes away and people just say, oh, may God forgive him, or may God forgive her. And then a bunch of people ask, like, why, what did they do? And they're genuinely asking because they think, oh, and even when I read that sentence in English, it sounds like the person did some heinous crime and then died, but they were kind of a good person and there's some justification. So maybe they did a crime of passion or something, and you're saying, well, may God forgive them. This is how it kind of sounds to me. So yeah. Right. Let me just. Yeah. I mean, so yeah. I mean, I see. Yeah, people. Yeah, because I wonder. So yeah, I mean, to me, This is why I would advise that people say, especially in English, they just say blissful things, which is the Islamic thing to say, by the way, as well. You could as well in Islam pray for their forgiveness, but it also, to me, it reflects it reflects your attitude as well towards God. Like maybe this is at a subconscious level, because when you see, what do you zero in on subconsciously? You zero in on that people are sinful and you're hopeful that God will forgive. Whereas if you said something like, may God give them this and this, you're zeroing in subconsciously on the mercy of God and not driven by this narrative of sin. So that's my thoughts. Yeah. Asking for forgiveness is so much part of, yeah. But these are my thoughts, sure. Um I think it's better to tune how you see God. Do you or live your life thinking about sin? Is God like an accountant that keeps account? Now, to some people, that's the arc, that's the kind of the main narrative that they carry across, that God is keeping account and I will have to account and I will have to pray for forgiveness and and to me, it's not that this message doesn't exist in Islam, that of course Allah is aware, but to me the central message is always of mercy and love and compassion, and it's not of these things. But sure, if that makes it better for them, this is how they want to live. God is keeping everything is about an account book Like, oh no, I made one sin today, I better make three this, I better do this. It just kind of, for me, robs the soul of living. Okay, so did I miss a super chat here? Manak Salim, shukran, much love for the super chat. Allah bless you. Likewise, may Allah bless you, Manak. I dearly appreciate it. Oneza, shukran. Most favorite scholar. All right. All right. So, do you think that life is ultimately sad? That's a fascinating question. I think it is true. I was watching something once of who was it? Jordan Peterson, and I agree that he was saying that you see because he's speaking of consciousness, and he said, well, you see, one thing we can never truly doubt is pain. Or agony. Like he said, well, if you're having fun, you're having fun. Like if you're happy, but you could still doubt being in a state of happiness. But he said you couldn't doubt being in a state of suffering. So if you're in a state of suffering, that is certain. But in a state of bliss, you can always still doubt it. I thought, wow, look at it. This is ruining the little moments of bliss we have. Putting shak and doubt into it. But it's fascinating because he then said, he extrapolated that maybe based on, an abstraction of that is why most world faiths have said suffering is the default reality of existence. And that's where they begin from, because that ultimately locks in consciousness. I thought that that's a very profound point. And I would somewhat agree with that life ultimately is a backdrop of suffering. But then, as in that's what it is, it's challenges. If I replace the word with, because suffering is the meaning you give to it, but it is, let's say, it is a rocky path, but your attitude is what makes it blissful. And the way you look, the way you kind of just enjoy yourself walking along this rocky path, that's the difference. That इन्हीं पत्थरों पर चलकर आ सको तो आओ. That if you can come walk over these rocks and come to me, then come. इन्हीं पत्थरों पर चल कर आ सको तो आओ. मेरे घर के रास्ते में कोई कहकशां नहीं. Allah. He says the path to my home is not starlit, or it's a very dark path. Like there's no moonlight and no lighting, and it's a rocky terrain. But if you can come through it, then ahlan wa sahlan. I thought that's so yeah. So, but I don't think life itself is sad. I think sad is associated with the emotion, the state of mind that you have. It's like that, going back to that poem of today, that tufan kar raha tha mere azam ka tawaf. That the person doesn't seem sad when he's saying that, but he's trapped in a storm. Dunya samajh rahi thi, kashti bhavar mein hai. But it is, the ship is in a storm. But it was his attitude that, he's like, hell, you think this is, this is a style. He says, this ain't a storm, this is a style. But you have to always admire people like that, because that is, people that can always see the kind of, they have that keep going attitude, because you've got no choice. One has to keep going. There is no alternative. Right. Super chat. Sam, shukran, much love for the super chat. Is there a link between intelligence and the proclivity to the path of consciousness? Why is that path really taken by most Islam's biggest scholars? I don't know. I don't think intelligence is. I think the term intelligence is in that statement is it's immaterial to the discourse. I don't feel that it's it kind of is pro or against. Why did many scholars not seek the ultimate path of consciousness? I think obviously another thing is it's difficult to know what people ultimately did because you only know what they told you they did. See, that's another important thing. Maybe many more people did much more than what they told you they did. Because it's true, people, you don't want to share as well everything, and people fear ramifications, they fear repercussions, and especially in the past, you can imagine the lynch mob and some people would still do stuff. Like, you take Ibn Hazm as an example. Now, he's such a serious scholar, very feisty and fiery and just argumentative and radical in his opinions, and this is why I've always found him very inspiring. But then he writes this book all about the kind of psychology of love, which is full of just anecdotes of, I don't know, discussions on categories or chapters of love, with just stories, and he's saying these are actual events that he's either witnessed or from somebody's told him that is reliable, and he's writing this book after the age of 40. He says, I write this after the age of 40, so don't think I'm kind of some young kid carried away. And in it, he's kind of telling all these love stories, and he's telling some of his own love stories, different women, and how certain obsessions. And now, in many ways, that was a very daring feat of Ibn Hazm, because you see, these things could, and they may have as well, damaged him, as in may have caused, extended some suffering onto him, because people would utilize these to attack. Obviously, with that particular book, they didn't, maybe because in that day and age, this was a part of life that people maybe weren't that fussed about. The scholars didn't really use it against him, but they could have. They used other things against him, and they did have him attacked and his books burnt and all this kind of stuff. So one has to be wary that in the past, what does one say and what do they speak of? And this is why when I've been asked about, for example, do I think people in the past were exploring psychedelics? And I think many, maybe not most, but many people were exploring psychedelics, because nature is not new to us. We're not the first people to see mushrooms. Mushrooms have been around a lot longer than us. So why would you think that people haven't been eating mushrooms? Like this is an example. Like, why would you think that see, it's such a dumb modern kind of, like, it's such a silly notion to assume that people before, why would people have eaten food that just naturally grows in nature? Duh. Like, well, of course they would have. So the question is, well, if that's the case, why weren't they talking about it? This is amazing book I've got it here somewhere. I think I've put it back. It's a small book about study of psychedelics and animals. So animals that get kind of, they take psychedelics, and you can watch them, and they do it in nature, and they do it, and it alters their state of consciousness. So you'll get rabbits, deers, you'll get chimpanzees, you'll get different people, and cows, and when they do it, they kind of, like, you can tell they've gone, and then they will do it again because they want that state of consciousness again. So if animals were doing it, why would you think human beings weren't? But then the people would say, well, why weren't they talking about it? But let me ask you, do you talk about everything you do as a person? you don't. And people won't, because people probably think, well, maybe they're unsure, or maybe they don't want it, or maybe they fear that if they talk about it, people will just, you know, kind of write them off and say that, oh, this is haram, or this is this, and this is that. And maybe people will use it. This is why this book was really good revelatory to read, The Joy of Pain, because it showed, and I said in my discussion that I found it quite relieving to read that, because it showed that we as human beings deep down have an urge to hate on people, but we recognize socially that hating on people is a bad thing. So when we're given an excuse, we will take that excuse all the way. So if we have a reason, so he gives examples like, let's say, he says, he uses things like a term which he borrows from someone, humilitainment, like humiliation, entertainment, humilitainment. And he says shows like American Idol, or shows like How to Catch a Predator. And he says that why do people go over and beyond in these shows? He says, well, because they, like he says, well, How to Catch a Predator is a prime example, because all cultures hate pedophiles. So this is an absolute green light to really go all out. And your hate is totally kind of venerated and justified. And even American Idol, as an example, or Britain's Got Talent, the reason you're justified is because people will say to themselves, well, such and such person knew they couldn't sing, so they made a fool out of themselves. Why would you audition if you didn't know it? When you're incapable. So it gives them an excuse to go all out. And he cites a lot of studies like Tiger Woods and great people when they, when they mess up, and scandals, or other things when people have serious accidents, or when people, why do people, because deep down they have this urge to hate. So I wouldn't be so sure that people didn't follow a particular path, although only a few openly spoke about it. So that's, yeah. Shroomed out go. It's a good book, actually. It's I normally just had it here somewhere, but I must have moved it and put it back in the library. But so yeah, it's interesting to see just animals getting all stoned out. But it's not stoned, to be honest. I don't like that word because it doesn't describe psychedelics. It's more about certain substance abuse. Psychedelics is more about being altering a state of consciousness. Right, let's take a look at today's Quranic guidance. We can move on. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. So I wanted to take a look today, 2 verses from Surah Al Imran, and verse 140, and then just the verse before it. But I really want to take a look at this verse, and the verse just before it, 139, will then kind of give a bit more guidance on this. So this verse that we've got here, that إِن يَمْسَسْكُمْ قَرْحٌ, Surah Al Imran, verse 140, إِن يَمْسَسْكُمْ قَرْحٌ فَقَدْ مَسَّ الْقَوْمَ قَرْحٌ مِثْلُهُ. That if you are suffering or been afflicted or subjected to a kind of wound, and I feel that this, although at one level is speaking about actual wounds, but then on many other levels it's speaking about different. This is from what I speak of the superposition nature of the Quran, that is speaking about emotional wounds, speaking about mental wounds, psychological wounds, financial wounds, is speaking about any kind of qarah that you have suffered. Iyamsaskum qarah. And you might remember the word qarah, we covered it in when we spoke about Imra al-Qais, and he was called the Quruh, the one of wounds. because when he eventually wore that from Justinian, the kind of robe or the clothes, they were kind of imbibed with this kind of poisonous element that it would kind of get into the pores of the skin, and eventually it led to his death. So, and we've covered that in a previous session. You can watch it on YouTube. But he was called the Quruh, and he says that in his poem that I'd never thought that وَمَا خِلْتُ تَبْرِيحَ الْأَيَّامِ, where he says, I've never have thought that the days would be such that تَضِيقُ ذَرْعِي أَنْ أَقُومَ فَأَلْبَسَ, that it would get to the extent that I can't even manage to stand and wear my clothes. وَلَوْ أَنَّ النَّفْسَ تَمُوتُ جَمِيعَةً لَكِنَّهَا نَفْسٌ تَسَاقَطُ أَجْمَعَ. That so he says, if only the soul would kind of die. But it was he's speaking about his wounds, but just the word here, that was just a linguistic reference. إِن يَمْسَسْكُمْ قَرْحٌ فَقَدْ مَسَّ الْقَوْمَ قَرْحٌ مِثْلُهُ. That if you have been afflicted, others too have been afflicted. وَتِلْكَ الْأَيَّامُ نُدَاوِلُهَا بَيْنَ النَّاسِ. Allah. وَتِلْكَ الْأَيَّامُ نُدَاوِلُهَا بَيْنَ النَّاسِ. And these days, we rotate them amongst people. See, that if you feel like you're on top of the world, then it turns around. Every 24 hours, there's going to be ups, downs. تلك الأيام نداولها بين الناس. These days we rotate them between people. وَلِيَعْلَمَ اللَّهُ. So here, now, this as well being very clear. وَلِيَعْلَمَ اللَّهُ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَيَتَّخِذَ مِنْكُمْ شُهَدَاءَ. Okay. So that now this is not so Allah may know, or even though that's how it, from a linguistic element, you may write it in that way. It doesn't mean like that. So it may become known. It's not for Allah to know. Allah already has knowledge. So that it may become known. And who is it that it becomes known amongst? You. So Allah says, وَيَتَّخِذَ مِنْكُمْ شُهَدَاءَ. And Allah allows you, all of you, to become witnesses. Now, witnesses to what? You see, you become witnesses to your own success, to your failings, to the failings of others, but to become observant. Because, you see, you may see the tragedy of someone else. We were speaking of this Schadenfreude. But truly, in Arabic, there's a saying that as-sa'id, the truly fortunate person, is man wa'idha bighayri. Somebody that you see the tragedies of others and you learn through that. Not circumventing having to experience them yourself. Because everybody learns once they experience tragedies. The true genius and fortunate person is the one who can learn from the tragedies of others. Thinks, Raja, this is what happened to that person, so I better watch out. وَيَتَّخِذَ مِنْكُمْ شُهَدَاءَ. Now, you see, when you are a witness to people, whether it's people's successes, whether it's people's suffering, whether it's your own success, whether it's your own suffering. Now, what would that do? Let's just back that up a moment. Something bad happens to someone, a bit of misery. Something good happens to someone, a bit of envy. Yeah, and people act out on envy. And in fact, in that book as well, he has a chapter on envy, and he goes into it and some of the studies around it, for some of the psychological and sociological studies around it as well. And it's interesting that you see envy, and he goes into the etymology that it was on seeing. This is how it's etymology, because people felt that the kind of by seeing something, and this an abstraction of it became like the evil eye, because often the evil eye, what is it? It's the coveting, that lustful, that jealous, that hateful, spiteful eye. Itself, it doesn't do anything, but people often act out on it. You see, this is the problem. And in many ways, this, when people spoke of an evil eye, this is an abstraction of what they're talking about, envy. And then people kind of took it into other things, that maybe there's actual supernatural powers and things like that. And obviously, that was the science of the day and age, because the science of the day and age believed in extramission, not intromission of the eyes. They used to believe that the eyes emit like vision. They didn't think that we kind of took light in. They thought this is prior to all the discoveries. So they felt that the light that we emit vision rays. And so this is why you get a lot of scholars, Ibn al-Qayyim al-Jawziyah, all these people who back then, because this wasn't fully discovered yet. Even you'll get scientists speaking about Western scientists. I have a video on this. You'll get Francis Bacon and Descartes, and even you'll get people speaking about extramission of the eyes and intromission. And so people felt that the eyes kind of shot out this, what were like vision rays. And this is how we saw. And because they're shooting them out anyway, so you'll get scholars like Ibn al-Qayyim will explain that, oh, well, in these rays that we are shooting whilst we're looking, the malice, some of them contain harmful rays. So this explains how you have the evil eye. Because you see, even those scholars, you see, this is the weird thing. Even those scholars clearly believed in a cause and effect. They didn't think of it in a supernatural way. They believed in it because it was the science of their day and age, that they believed that this is how the eye works, that it emits these rays and these extramission rays. And because it's emitting them, it's like saying, like, let's say spitting. Now, when you spit, it's carrying something out. So if you had a disease within and you spit, now, even if the disease is within and the spit is coming from the mouth, but it's carrying part of what you have, the toxins. So you could spread things, and they understood that. This is why spitting in drinks and stuff like this was clearly prohibited, because they understood it would make it go bad. So when they believed that the eye emitted things, so they thought, well, so if you have something bad, it makes sense, because as you're emitting the vision rays, some of them are harmful rays. It's a bit like today saying, well, some of the sun's rays are harmful and they fall on you and they damage your skin. I mean, that's at a different dimension, but I'm still giving a parallel. And so it made sense to them in accordance. So they weren't believing in it in a kind of they were believing in it because obviously they believe that, look, here are some texts that speak of this. And the culture believed in it, but also because it made sense scientifically to them, because they thought that's how the human body worked. Obviously, later, it's very clear that the eye does not work with extramission, it works through intromission. Okay. And we actually take in light and we don't kind of emit anything. So yeah, so it's interesting. So people, one way of looking at, let's say, the whole thing about the evil eye is in terms of consequences. So when people in the past, so let's say people say, oh, there's the hadith. Now the hadith says that the eye, al-ainu haq, it is haq in terms of what? In terms of the danger that it carries, that the evil, malicious glaze and the eye, the coveting eye, is truly a danger. And that is absolutely true. There is nothing wrong or inaccurate about that statement. It is factual that the coveting, evil, malicious, kind of hateful glance and eye of an individual is a categorical danger, because it ruins everything, because it will be a danger to, first of all, to the person who's looking with such kind of hate, because it will burn them up from within. Secondly, it influences behavior, because people then may act out. Thirdly, even if it doesn't influence behavior, it warrants and justifies Schadenfreude. That let's say there was a powerful person, or let's say in the past there was some very rich, or even today, mega rich people, multimillionaires, very powerful, let's say socially. Nobody can do something to, even if they are very envious of them. People may look at these celebrities and be very envious that their life is goddamn perfect. Why do they get this? Why is my life, messed up? Why can't I have this? Why can't I even live in a decent place? Why do they get mansions? Why do they have 55 houses? Why do they have, they can do this and they can do that, and why can't? So it causes it, but people can't do anything about it. But when something bad happens to them, you see, Allah says, وَيَتَّخِذَ مِنْكُمْ شُهَدَاءَ. He will make you a witness. Why? Because when something bad happens to them, you justify, you gloat in that, you revel in that Schadenfreude. That, you see, it gives you, so this evil, malicious eye is always a danger in all circumstances. I mean, some people understood it as maybe a kind of scientific danger. Otherwise, from an existential perspective, it is clearly a danger. From an ethical perspective, it is a danger, because from a psychological perspective, it is a danger. From a moral perspective, it is a danger. And this, Allah follows the verse, completing it, Wallahu la yuhibbu zalimin. Allah, making it very clear, Allah does not love the transgressors. It's interesting, and look how Allah in the Quran, and this is from the beauty, wallahi, of the Quran, of the scripture, and we mentioned this in our discussion as well. Seldom is the word hate used. Allah says either He loves, or He says He does not love. See, so many occasions Allah is mentioning just love, 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 love right throughout the Quran. Even when it's something so spiteful, so horrible, so hateful from a people's perspective, so wrongdoers, evil people, kuffar, people rejecting God, preventing people from accepting God, people that are being harsh to orphans, people that are being harsh to poor people. Allahu la yuhib. Allah does not love those people. You see, it's all about that proximal zone to love, being closer to it or being farther away from it. Seldom is it Allah hates. And if it is, it's mentioned about a thing, not about people. But whenever it's people, Allahu la yuhib, Allah does not love. That in itself is such a beautiful message. If you're just going to take that message, that in itself. And then you had, this was verse 140, and verse 139, we'd covered that previously, but just seeing it again in line with this, because 140 is nested in that وَلَا تَهِنُوا وَلَا تَحْزَنُوا وَأَنْتُمُ الْأَعْلَوْنَ إِن كُنْتُمْ مُؤْمِنِينَ. Because speaking of the vicissitudes, the ups and downs of faith, Allah saying, وَتِلْكَ الْأَيَّامُ نُدَاوِلُهَا بَيْنَ النَّاسِ. Don't think it's always going to be a win. Don't think it's going to always be glory and glamour. It isn't. But you can still have contentment in there. You can still have peace at heart. And Allah reminds you, لا تهنوا, do not fall weak. ولا تهنوا ولا تحزنوا. Don't be sad. Honestly, one of the most amazing verses of the Quran. ولا تحزنوا. You know, don't be sad. What are you being sad over? أنتم الأعلون. You will triumph. You will win. In kuntum mu'minin. If you have faith. If you carry the story. And winning can look different. You see, this is the important lesson. It can look very different. It doesn't have to be a medal. It doesn't have to mean a huge bank balance. It doesn't have to mean assets. Winning, sure, those things are also a dimension, a permutation of winning. But winning is at heart. It is a state of mind. That is truly winning. It's so, but for that you have to carry the story. You have to carry the faith. In kuntum mu'minin. Honestly, this verse, I would say, if you can just remember, wherever in life you are just maybe feeling down, just if you can remember it all, or even if you just remember وَلَا تَهِنُوا وَلَا تَحْزَنُوا وَأَنْتُمُ الْأَعْلَوْنَ. And if you can't remember that, just remember وَلَا تَحْزَنُوا. Do not be sad. Honestly, there's nothing, full stop. Do not be sad. There's a question that, do you feel life is sad? Don't feel life is sad. Feel life is thriving. With life. With excitement, with vibrance, with glory. It is sure. The other question, if you rephrase the question, do you think life is full of challenges? Hell yeah. From A to Z. From birth till death. It's full of challenges all the way. But it's about perspective. وَلَا تَحْزَنُوا. Don't be sad. Allahu Akbar. Honestly, I thought this is such a powerful reminder, because ultimately it's these little things that are the true anchor points for us in life. Cool. Let's move on, inshallah. Right. So somebody said, are arrogant people arrogant people deserving of hate? You see, I think I agree with that author, Richard Smith, that we fundamentally want to hate. And I think that's a disease we carry. And where it's justified, it's easier for us to exercise it. Like hating on Mother Teresa isn't. See, actually, Mother Teresa is a good example. Because it just occurred to me, it should have occurred to me in my book discussion. Mother Teresa spends all her life, in servitude. Great woman, symbol, an icon of giving forward, of serving. She goes to Calcutta and, just sacrifices her life really for helping orphans. And just all the kind of great work that she did. In the last year or years of her life, I think it was the last year of her life, she wrote a letter to I believe, was it a bishop or to some uh, to some church figure, in which she questions her faith. That does she really believe in all this, you know, in this heaven and all this stuff? Does she really believe even in God? And it's a really it's a fascinating kind of almost case study of how then people, you see, it gave somewhat of a green light to target her, because we, like I said, are creatures that have this energy, which is a strong, unstoppable energy, and I feel it can manifest as hate, or maybe it can manifest as love as well at times, but it's kind of enantiodroma. But I think it has a proclivity, a preponderance towards hate. But we need an excuse. So you take Mother Teresa as an example, and she's this icon of sacrifice, self-sacrifice. But then in her final stage, she questions God, and that she says, well, or she spent all her life witnessing suffering. That is there really a God? And these questions are valid. It's not so. Some people, not all, but some people took it then as a green light to hate on her. Say, wasted your life. What a loser. Mother Teresa, she didn't even die a Christian, or she no longer believed in Christianity. And this is a fine example of people just needing an excuse. Because whether she was an atheist or whether she was a Christian, she still spent her life serving people. And all of a sudden, to mock her just because she questioned her faith. I mean, she could have questioned her faith when in her 20s. But I think it's what it does is it instantiates, it gives us an example of how people just seek this, they want to exercise this quality, dare I say, quality of hating, this emotion of hating. What's this about families? So people spoke badly of her. Yeah, they did. Absolutely, they did. They did. So it's what's this? She said didn't have a husband and kids to slow her down. Come on, what bad humor is that? I mean, she was a great woman, just as anybody who spends their life sacrifices their own indulgences to serve other people. But I think it was just a right example for Schadenfreude. Right, people. Speaking of the vicissitudes of fate, I think let's introduce a personality. Allah. Right. I wanted to speak last week and then we got distracted. I had said I will introduce the personality of Abu Muslim al-Khurasani. And who was he? So, learning a bit about him, we'll come across certain other personalities, okay, certain names. And the good thing is, like I mentioned, to kind of map these out, maybe research them in your own time, maybe learn about them, watch stuff on YouTube about them, do different things. So in this journey of this character, Abu Muslim al-Khurasani, there'll be people, you'll hear the names of Marwan ibn Muhammad, or Marwan al-Ja'di, or Marwan al-Himar, the last Umayyad caliph, Abdul Hamid al-Katib, one of the earliest um, one of the earliest influences on Arabic prose, or Arabic. What's a better way to say it? That how almost like sermon, like on the he set out the science of how to, which would dictate sermon practice and things like this. We'll get to that. People like that, people like Ibrahim al-Imam, the great grandson of Abdullah ibn Abbas and the leader of the Abbasids, Umayyads. This is a key term, Bani Umayyah, Bani al-Abbas, the Abbasids, Abu Ja'far al-Mansur, who we've met previously, spoken about in a few stories, especially the story of Abu Dulama. You'll have Abu Abbas al-Safah, who we've spoken about previously as well. So these are some of the names that you'll hear being kind of bounced around, and you may want to explore them at your own leisure. But coming back to this individual, Abu Muslim al-Khurasani is an incredibly fascinating individual. Why? Because he, in many ways, is a nobody, yet while simultaneously being everybody when it came to an entire imperial change. Okay, so a shift. So you have, right, to understand this, we're going to have to pause Abu Muslim al-Khurasani. He himself, before we pause him, just giving a brief introduction to him. He is somebody who is of Persian descent. Some people say whether his parents became Muslim or not is discussed, but he himself, according to certain people, ends up as a slave, a small boy. He's kind of brought, freed, and he encounters as a young man. Apparently, his ancestors, his Persian ancestors, may have been of kind of imperial aristocracy. So they may have been people of great lineage within the Persian kind of Sassanid empires, allegedly. Obviously, it's difficult to ascertain these things when empires have collapsed and some people claim things. Now, you don't know whether it was real or not. But that's this lad who grows up quite destitute, incredibly formidable in character, has something very just striking about his personality, very charming, charismatic. He's incredibly eloquent in Farsi, but also learns Arabic and is incredibly eloquent in Arabic. And he ends up, from this nobody, not only rubbing shoulders with the elite of Bani al-Abbas, the Abbasid, but arguably the kind of key determinator, the kind of determining factor, the kind of the dagger in the sleeve of the Abbasid gown that enables them to topple the Umayyad dynasty. So this person is a nobody yet everybody. Okay. So this is why he's so fascinating. So okay, let's put him aside. And he's kind of, he has this meteoric rise to fame. He just comes out of nowhere and suddenly he's this icon, celebrity, and then as he rises he falls. وتلك الأيام نداولها بين الناس. So let's put him aside. Right. Somebody said, reminds me of myself, Mufti. I sure hope so. I sure hope so. So let's go back to the time of Bani Umayyah. Now, we've already spoken. We've got I've got a whole video on Sulaiman ibn Abdul Malik, and it's definitely worth watching if you haven't watched it. It gives a lot of history in that, what was happening in Bani Umayyah's time, the kind of the downhill trend, and then how Sulaiman tries to push an uphill trend, and after him he puts in place Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, which becomes this kind of twilight phase once again in what was otherwise becoming a very dark legacy for Bani Umayyah. Now, Bani Umayyah are almost the, they rule, let's say, about arguably no, just no, not they don't make 100 years, but near enough, over 90. So after Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, there's some changes. You do go through, you'll go through Yazid, and then there'll be some. This is not the first Yazid. This is a late Yazid, and we go through them in that video. However, they eventually end up on this person known as Marwan ibn Muhammad. Now he's popularly known as they call him Marwan al-Himar, Marwan the donkey, or Marwan al-Ja'di. The reason they call him Ja'di is because of he had this teacher that he was inspired by, Ja'ad, that they refer him to. And ironically, they don't, when they call him Marwan al-Himar, and I must say, I too was guilty of this, I assumed it's as an insult, but it's actually as an accolade, it's actually as an element of praise. Just goes to show when people think that you can read into history. So this must be the biggest gaslighting. They got a chart. So you thought when we're calling you a donkey, we were insulting you. Yeah, we were praising you. We weren't saying donkey, we were saying donkey. So it's true that they say that he's called donkey as a praise because of his kind of tenacity to go on. So what era is this? This is the years we're talking, maybe the final like 125 Hijri, that kind of time. So it's almost, we're talking over 115 years after the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So it's in the time that people like Imam Abu Hanifa are around. It's in the time Imam Malik is around. It's in that kind of era of the Tabi'een. So Marwan, known as Marwan al-Himar, he is called this because there's a saying in Arabic as well that asbaru min himar, that somebody's more patient than a donkey. Because a donkey, I don't know if you've seen in certain countries where they utilize donkeys, they actually load them with quite a load, and they stack them, make them carry quite a burden. I've seen it in villages, like they'll make them carry bricks and carry all this, and the donkey just trods along. Just occasionally just chucks everything over. It's not that, but it has this kind of tenacity to just keep trotting along. And they say that was why they were calling that's why they were calling him a donkey. Either that was true or this was like the biggest gaslighting event of they go, that wasn't an insult, that was an accolade. Yeah. Jahil doesn't even understand the difference between praise and so that's like calling somebody a dog and then saying, no, I meant you're like a true best friend to man. That's what I meant. They say a dog is a man's best friend. But anyway, I'm not making this up. This is in the books. They say that, by the way, Himar is not an insult to Marwan. It's actually an accolade. It's a praise for him because he would, this meant he had the tenacity to keep going. So anyway, Marwan, before he becomes caliph, he's in charge of these areas like Armenia and some of the kind of Balkan regions and stuff like this. So he's had his expertise in war. But there is a huge restlessness that is rising against Bani Umayyah. And we've spoken of this previously. People were upset. And there was a lot of factions that were conspiring against them, especially the main strength against them was the Shia. Okay, because the kind of family of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam being persecuted, this narrative was the strongest narrative. And people were fed up anyway. It's not just sometimes you need something to believe in, but people also give you an excuse because Bani Umayyah weren't, they were, they were who they were. It's very obvious they weren't that considerate of people. There was heavy taxes at times. There were confiscations. There were all these kind of things going on. So the kind of Shia movement is rising, and it seems to garner and harness an ear in the far east of the Muslim world. So places like Khurasan, which is modern day Afghanistan, and maybe parts of that region going north, maybe today some parts of that kind of Western Central Asia being part of it. But this Khurasan region, they seem to have a soft spot for the Shia kind of movement. And at the forefront of the Shia movement were obviously you had the Alawiyin, people who were claiming that being, let's say, the descendants of Sayyidina Ali radiallahu anh. But you also had people just generally from Bani Hashim, the greater clan. And amongst them, you had people that would be the offspring of Abdullah ibn Abbas, and Abbas, the uncle of the Prophet, which is all the clan of Hashim. And remember, all of Hashim, including Sayyidina Ali, they are united by that cause because they're all ultimately one blood. So to them, Bani Umayyah are the arch rivals. So you start to see a strategic elevation arise in the Abbasids amongst this. So let's say all of these are one group, and those from Abbas seem to have more charming characters and personalities. So you have this personality, Ibrahim ibn Muhammad. Now, they call him Ibrahim al-Imam. He is somebody that starts calling towards this da'wah and calling people, and he's very charming, very kind of has that mysterious element to him. So Bani Umayyah imprison him. They catch him. He's locked up in prison. But in that day and age, the prisons were slightly different. So people would allow people to come visit prisoners. It wasn't the kind of way today we see prisons. They're a lot more institutionalized. And on a separate discussion, one could speak about Foucault, the Foucauldian analysis of prisons and the institutionalization of modernity. But prisons in that day and age were quite like you were locked up, the person was locked up, they were in this thing, but people could come and go and they could bring them food and they could do stuff and they could even spend like a whole day there. They could spend several days with them. Like people didn't actually care. It wasn't like, oh, who are you or what? They're just like weren't bothered, indifferent to it. So what happens is somebody gives Abu Muslim Al-Khurasani, they give him some things to take to Ibrahim al-Imam, like as in like a just use him as a go for this, go for that. He's this kind of young boy. He's not very it's just he had been a former slave and stuff. And so Ibrahim al-Imam sees something special in him. And he asks him, what's your name? And then there's differences that his name was something else before, and people use different names. What Ibrahim al-Imam says to him is that he takes a liking to him and he renames him. He says that he gives him this name, Abu Muslim, that this is who you are. And so, okay, and he can see that there's this clear kind of dynamic, like a bond, like this, like almost a guide, a sheikh, and a disciple, or almost like a senior warrior kind of spirit, and you've got this disciple. This kind of bond gets created because this Abu Muslim he's bringing him food every other day and he's spending time there. He ends up talking to him. And Ibrahim al-Imam can see this guy is he has a charm to him and a charisma. And he's obviously he's got a strong stature. He's physically has this presence. He's young, but he has this presence. And as the days turn into months, which turn into 1 or 2 years, that there is this bond going on. The da'wah of let's say, the Abbasids, which is actually the da'wah of the Hashemiyin, the Shia, it is growing stronger and stronger day by day in the Khurasan region. So people ask Ibrahim al-Imam that, look, we need to send someone, we need to capitalize on it. We need to send someone that can take charge and kind of mobilize, get armies together. And, we have to, it's ripe. We need to do something. So he says, you're right. And so they ask him, who will you nominate? Because they've got all these figures. They've got, these great people from Abbasids and Hashmin and Alawin. And he says, this young lad here, Abu Muslim, says, I send him in charge. And, it's incredibly fascinating. In psychology, you have something known as the Pygmalion effect, that maybe sometimes the expectation of excellence from someone, it impacts and influences the performance of excellence in the observed. So if a coach, let's say a football coach or any sports coach, kind of just sees, for some reason, has the belief of excellence in a particular young player, often it happens that player rises to that excellence to match the expectation. And this is called the Pygmalion effect. And it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. And so Abu Muslim takes this up and he goes, and first of all, there's some, there's battles, and he's this relentless. People are shocked how ruthless this person is. And he just suddenly rises to fame. And the people of the region, actually, once he locks control of Khurasan, they love him. They absolutely love him. And maybe some people say maybe it's because he was Persian and he could speak Farsi. See, a lot of those people back then, they spoke Farsi. And people say he was eloquent in Farsi. And some people say maybe because he alleged to have been from the legacy of the Kisras. Like he claimed his forefathers were the great Sassanid rulers. And maybe that struck awe in the hearts of these Khurasaniyin and people. And maybe, or maybe it was just his stature. Maybe it was the fact that he was ruthless in his military campaigns. And he would go to, he would crush any rebellion. And this is why he became such a renowned figure. So what happens? The key people of the Abbasid movement, because remember, this is all the Shia movement, but the Abbasids seem to be they seem to be at the vanguard, at the front of it. Okay, taking lead in it. So he starts to rub shoulders with the top people that are there. Like, he already knows Ibrahim al-Imam, like Abu al-Abbas al-Safah. and other people. These are all, he's like, as if he's one of them. And do you know when he's going, Ibrahim al-Imam says to him, now this is interesting. He says to him, now speaking about that prophecy, he says to him, he says, Abu Muslim, he says, Anta minna ahlul bayt. And in many ways reenacting that scene where the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is saying this to Salman al-Farsi, that you are from us, one of our household, like you to us are real family. And this is then celebrated, and you can imagine what it does to how it boosts the spirit of this, who's very young, by the way, at this time he's just in his 20s, and he's doing all these expeditions, and these stories are going wild that Ibrahim al-Imam has called him like from us Ahlul Bayt, and so all this starts to happen. He locks Khurasan. Meanwhile, Ibrahim al-Imam kind of passes away. People say that he's killed by the Umayyads, and there's more turbulence going right throughout the Umayyad state. So what happens is, at the year 131 Hijri, the Abbasids from Khurasan mobilize an army to move down. They think the time is ripe. We should attack and take over whatever we can. Now, Marwan al-Himar, he realizes, and he was like a strong warrior as well. He thinks that, okay, he hears of these armies coming from the east with black flags. Now, this is interesting, by the way, because a lot of the hadith literature that people will sometimes present of these armies coming from the east with black flags at the end of time, it is about the Abbasids. And this is why most of this, it seems very plausible that most of these kind of ahadith are fabricated to serve the Abbasids. Because where it mentions these people will come out of the east with black flags, and they will have kunyas in like Abu something, Abu Muslim, Al-Khurasani. And these things were there to support that kind of cause, because people really, the power of belief, the script, it's phenomenal. If anybody watches, whether it's going to be a boxing match, or sometimes you get these UFC matches, and they're having that square up, and one of the opponents is he's doing a lot of trash talk. I'm gonna do this. Whoa, you're already dead. I already, it's like you're gonna see Conor McGregor. He'll be saying things like, "Oh, I already see. Your lips already blue. You're a dead man walking." Blah blah blah. Now, what are they? They're trying to kill the spirit, because once you kill the spirit, the man is just a dead man walking. You see, so the power of belief, it is, one could argue, even more than half the battle. So these armies are coming out of the east carrying black flags with kunyas like Abu something, okay, like Abu Muslim, Abu al-Abbas as-Safah, Abu Ja'far al-Mansur, all these kind of things. But especially people like Abu Muslim, because he's not even known by his name. He's just known as Abu Muslim. That's the name that he goes by. He doesn't, but that's really just a kunya, but it's how he's known. So Marwan mobilizes an army, and they move forward, and they meet at this place. And there's this famous battle, and we can cover that on another day, called the Battle of Zab. But it is the key determining factor that topples the entire Umayyad dynasty, and puts a full stop on a dynastic reign that began since the time of Muawiyah radiallahu anh, right down to Marwan. And it ends in that year at this location in in the Middle East, northern, I believe, modern day Iraq, but it was called Waq'atuz Zab. Now, Marwan goes there, he takes these armies, and he thinks that, you know what, he's got a good chance. And there is a point where, and this battle goes on, and so many casualties. And there is a point where Marwan thinks he's going to win. But, I'll tell you, speaking of beliefs, check this out. Marwan himself was he was mixed race. So his mother was Kurdish. And so she was kind of very like fair-skinned, white-skinned, and this is why they describe him as very kind of like white-looking, white-skinned almost. And see, prior to Marwan, the other people, their mothers were usually of Arab descent, or they were free women. They weren't slaves. Marwan's mum, this Kurdish lady, was a slave. And then I think they freed her afterwards, but she was a slave to to his father Muhammad, who wasn't a king, but he was part of the Bani Umayyah. Now, there was this kind of, I don't know how not a rumor ain't the word, but this kind of urban myth that the Umayyads had, that if a king, if the son of a female slave was ever to be crowned, the dynasty will be toppled. Allah. So people have these beliefs, you see, and it's interesting because they can become self-fulfilling prophecies. Like in Pakistan, if I recall correctly, there was an urban myth that many years ago when I used to study there, that if Eid coincided with a Jum'ah, it meant that the government will be toppled. So whoever is in power will basically, the seat of power will be toppled. This was like a common, I don't know if people still believe it, but I'm talking almost 2 decades ago. But I remember at the time it was like a widely held belief that if Eid coincides with the Jum'ah, then the seat of power will be taken from whoever has it. Like this was, and people would just say, oh, and it would happen. It's mad how these beliefs then they kind of materialize. So there was this urban myth that if the son of a female slave was to be crowned, then the dynasty will be toppled. So they had this kind of urban myth floating. Now Marwan al-Himar fits that character. So you got to remember he's got this going on in the back of his head as well. And they have this decisive battle plays out. And what we'll do is maybe one day, another day, we'll actually concentrate on the battle as well, because that's interesting. But there is there's like a sidekick to Marwan al-Himar. He's just a literary genius. He's not like a politician. His name was Abdul Hamid al-Khatib, and he's one of the most eloquent Arabs of that era. And they say his kind of diction of how to write sermons is how everybody did it after him. So when you want to study kitaba, like today it seems silly, like when we say teaching kitaba, people think, do you mean like teaching how to write? Not how to write in a handwriting sense, but how does one write a book? How does one write a letter? Now, this seems dumb when we say it today because it's so common sense, but actually there's a science to it. So, for example, I actually recall, like when I was a kid, People obviously now they don't, but when I was a kid, people would write letters, and there was a method to it. Like you would begin a letter by, first of all, you'd explain that uh you'd kind of ask, like, okay, greetings, I hope you're well, I hope you'd ask about these people are well, I hope this is well. Then you'd explain, for example, I am well, this has been happening, this. Then you'd have a different paragraph that would get into some of what you're saying. Then you're good. It's like there was an etiquette to how to write. And it's not just letters, how to write books, for example. How do you have an introduction? How do you, first of all, you begin by praising Allah? How long does this praise of Allah go on for? So is it just like Alhamdulillah? Or does it go on for an entire paragraph? Many scholars argue that the person who set this style all into motion of how to write the first khutbah in Arabic in a book was Abdul Hamid al-Khatib. And that most people following him that wrote their books and everything were were influenced by his methodology. And prior to him, nobody used to do it. So it's fascinating that this person, how influential he was. He was so um so when it came to things like this, so he was like a sidekick to Marwan al-Himar, not politically, but almost like a kind of like a counselor friend. Like he was a friend, he was always with him, but he wasn't like Bani Umayyah, and he wasn't from that kind of kingly princely class, but he was just somebody that was so educated, and he was always full of wisdom, and he was great at convincing people. He was a huge, I don't know if you want to say manipulator ain't the right word, but you could imagine a a walking talking psychologist back then. They say that he would write to people and he'd have them convinced just like this. Like his words had magic in them. Abdul Hamid al-Khatib. And for many years, he was with Marwan al-Himar, and he's with him in this battle. And in the past, they've been in many battles, and when it's just dragging on, and there's so many casualties, what Abdul Hamid would do is sometimes he would write this epic proposal, which would be a truce, but it would always be very graceful, and it would be so convincing and compelling. So what he does is he says, look, let me write to them. So they say he has this kind of what they wrote on these parchments, yeah, which was like kind of like that leathery thing. And he has so much, he writes so much that they had to put it, like there were these huge sheets of parchment. They had to put it on a camel to take it across to Abu Muslim and to their camp. And this is one of the most eloquent people in the world when it comes to the Arabic language. This Abdul Hamid al-Khatib. Obviously, Abu Muslim is eloquent, but we're talking in a different league, this person, Abdul Hamid al-Khatib. And this was to be read. And remember, you've got the senior kind of commanders and all that would be standing, and they usually listen. And he had a way with the hearts of men, this Abdul Hamid did. So he sends these parchments, huge. They had to take them off. They're like sheets. And it's in like the most mesmerizing Arabic. And this is, when they say Abu Muslim al-Khurasani, huh? I guess that's when the sword meets the pen. When they took it off, before they could even approach it, Abu Muslim set fire to it. He got some fire. As they took it off the camel, all these sheets of the most hard-hitting, heart-compelling, mind-swaying Arabic that has come as a proposal. They say before they took it off the camel, Abdul Hamid got this torch and he just chucked it on there, set fire to it, and with a sword he cut off one small piece of a little parchment, just a small piece, just like they say, he just chopped that off and let the rest burn. And he's told everybody stand back. And he wrote on that little thing that he cut off, he wrote maha, that to delete, to remove. He said, maha saifu astar al-balaghati wantaha alayka liyuth al-ghabi min kulli janibi. Allah. He wrote that and handed it to the person, said, take it back. It said that the sword has torn the lines of eloquence and cast it aside. He said, the liyuth, layth means lion. He said, the lions of the jungle have surrounded you on every front. That maha sayfu astar al-balaghati wantaha alayka liyuth al-ghabi min kulli janib. Allah. That, ladies and gentlemen, was the decisive turning point in that battle. It crushed the spirits. You know, warfare has always been psychological more than physical. That it was just moments now. You can just say it was simply formalities. The Umayyads suffered a crushing defeat after that. Marwan manages to escape, and Abdul Hamid escapes with him. And Marwan does say to Abdul Hamid, you know, you are so eloquent that if you go to them and switch sides, they will definitely honor you because you're just a celebrity. But Abdul Hamid says, well, it's that perspective, I guess. He says, well, when all of life has gone this way, why switch at this last moment? Huh? He says, well, we got to die anyway someday. And then they manage to escape to Egypt, where they both eventually killed. And what happens is there is this huge victory for the Abbasids, and Abul Abbas as-Safah takes lead, and he does, and he's really vicious, and he kills so many people, thousands upon thousands, as he enters Damascus and stuff like this. But you see, what follows is Abu Muslim al-Khurasani has now attained this kind of princely status. So he starts to hope that maybe I too can become caliph. And then what he starts to do is, when people ask him, he starts to claim that apparently his grandfather, before how he would claim that his ancestors were from the Sassanids, he now starts to say, no, actually his kind of great grandfather was an offspring of Abdullah ibn Abbas. And so he starts to kind of align himself with the Abbasids, and he even tries to propose for who is the aunt of Abu Ja'far al-Mansur. Obviously, they turn it down, though. But this is him telling people, I'm like this. And he's really tight with the current ruler, which is Abu Abbas as-Safah. And what happens is there is this incident where he himself wants more people, Abu Muslim, to like him, and he can start to see this rivalry between him and Abu Ja'far al-Mansur. And there's another within the Abbasid, there's some breakaways. There's a lot of tension that who's going to be the next ruler, and people are kind of like privately competing, and Abu Muslim's kind of competing, and he's getting the masses to kind of like him. He's giving them gifts and he's doing stuff. And remember, we mentioned this before, some of them were very kind of open-hearted and they would do that. So this one year, Muslim asks Abu Safa that, can I this year lead the Hajj? Because you see, the person who leads the Hajj has this seniority. Like, people see him as an imam of the people. So just as Safa is about to agree, Mansur asks, can I lead people this year? So this really gets to really bothers Abu Muslim. And he even says that, could he find no other year to ask except this year? Does Hajj not happen in other years? And so what happens is, when they set off on the Hajj kind of convoy, Abu Muslim takes a different route and beats Mansur to the Hajj and starts giving all these gifts and winning the hearts and minds of people. People think, oh, wow. So when Abu Mansur got there, he didn't get the audience that he wanted, because Abu Mansur was really tight-fisted. We've covered this before. He's like super tight. He's one of the most tight-fisted. If you remember, people would call him Abu Dawanik, like the person of pennies, because he'd cling to the pennies. And so Abu Muslim has already gone and he's squandered this wealth, and people are like, wow. So when Abu Mansur gets there, Abu Ja'far al-Mansur, very few people receive him, and he asks that, where are the people? And they say, oh yeah, but they know you're here, but Abu Muslim had come before and he gave all these gifts, and people kind of took him and went home. So you can imagine, this is like really And what happens is, on the way back, the news comes that Safa has passed away. So people give the allegiance automatically to Mansur, Abu Ja'far al-Mansur. So this really annoys Abu Muslim. So he kind of doesn't come back in that part of Iraq, goes somewhere else. And this then leads to this rivalry that is going on between them. So at first, Abu Muslim goes back towards Khurasan side, and he starts gathering some kind of an army, thinking that, I will fight Abu Ja'far al-Mansur. And Abu Ja'far, at one point, he kind of sends this threatening letter to him. And it's amazing how, although Abu Muslim is so courageous, but this one threat seems to, they say, it hit him hard. That Abu Ja'far said to him that, look, that I swear by God, no matter what corner of the earth you go to hide in, I will seek you out and hunt you. Like he says, he kind of writes this threat to him. And they say that apparently this threat, for some reason, kind of shook Abu Muslim. And then Abu Ja'far thinks, look, let's do psychological warfare. So he sends some of his people to say that, by the way, we've softened up Mansur, and now he's cool with you. Just come with us. He just wants to patch it up. And he sets up this scenario of betrayal. So let me see if I can bring up some of these things here. So these are, I should have some of the script here somewhere, actually. This is a poem just contributing to what you can see. Somebody said, وَلَوْلَا سَيُوفُ أَبُو مُسْلِمٍ لَعَزَّتْ عَلَى جُهْدِ طُلَّابِهَا. Like, this is somebody dissing the Abbasids afterwards, saying that, it was really just Abu Muslim who, if it wasn't for his swords, you guys would never have conquered what you conquered. Now, yeah, let me just get this, show you guys the script. So what happens is, just to to 1 second to bring you up to speed first. So he sends, Abu Ja'far al-Mansur sends these people to win him over. That, look, just sweet talk him, tell him that I've changed my mind. He says it's very clear, so you got to don't let him cotton on. And when you guys come here, I'm going to treat him really well, but I'm going to have a code. And when I kind of click my fingers, and then I want you all to march forward with your swords and kind of stab him. Wow. Wow. The poison chalice. Allah. So what happens is these people go to Abu Muslim, they meet him, they are some senior figures. They convince him that Mansour has kind of softened up now and he wants you to come down. And Abu Muslim says, I don't know, he seems like I don't know. And they said, what are you talking about? We vouch for you. He says, Chaudhry Saab right here is vouching for you. It's like, cha cha cha. Asi aap no entry. What did the person say? He said, but there isn't a sign here, a no entry sign. He said to the copper. He goes, the copper goes, this is a no entry. He goes, but there's no sign here. And the copper goes, Asi aap sign. He goes, I am the no entry sign. So these people are like, look, don't worry about it. We're with you, yaar. We're with you. They're like, look, he's totally cool. He's changed. Yeah, he was a bit unsettled, but now he's cool. So they actually managed to convince him. So Abu Muslim turns up and he comes to the royal court. But when he's coming in, the people, like the guards outside, start kind of manhandling him. And obviously he's on his own. He's not like with an army. And you've got some guard and he's kind of pushing him. He's saying, oh, come this. And obviously this is a huge person. He's like the governor of Khurasan. He's like, by the way, in his lifetime, they say he contributed to the killing of over 500,000 people. I mean, that over 500,000. This is who he is. And at this stage, he's probably, I think, about 27, 28 or something. He's not that old. So he's being all manhandled and he's obviously finding this insulting. So he comes into Abu Mansur. And so, right, 1 second. Right, okay, that's better. So you've got here that, look, Abu Mansur says to him that he asks him, he says, because first of all, he complains about being manhandled at the door of the palace and stuff. And he says, oh, did they? He says, huh? Acha, I'm going to see to them. Don't worry, I'm going to see to them. How dare they disrespect you? Don't they know who you are? And all this. And check Abu Ja'far al-Mansur. He goes, Abu Ja'far al-Mansur goes, oh, I told them to obviously shake down normal guests, not you. You're not a normal guest. Come on, you're VIP. You're VIP, VIP. So then he says to him, I've got to ask you something. He says that ما حملك على أن تكتب لأبي عبد الله سفاه تنهاه عن الموات أردت أن تعلمنا الدين. You see, in the time of Safa, there was a point where Abu Muslim wrote to him. They were kind of acquiring, there was this acquisition of certain territories, and he felt that was forbidden in Islam. You couldn't do it like this. So he's asking him, were you trying to teach us Islam, by the way? Acha, Islam sikha rahe the aap. It's like, were you trying to? And he says, look, qala innani dhanant anna akhdahu la yahil. He said, I just thought it wasn't permissible in Islam. He says, but when the Amir al-Mu'mineen wrote to me, he says, I realized that they obviously from the household of Abbas must have a better understanding of the deen. He says, look, alimtu annahu wa ahla baytihi ma'adinul ilm, that they are a source of knowledge. Mansour says, acha, point, huh? Diplomacy. Says, acha, he says, فَلِمَ تَقَدَّمْتَ عَلَيَّ فِي طَرِيقِ الْحَجِّ. He says, what? This is where the old diary is being opened up. He says, remember when we were going to Hajj, why did you beat me to it? He says, قال كرهت اجتماعنا على الماء فيضر ذلك بالناس فتقدمت التماس الرفق. He says, Your Excellency, I didn't want both of our troops to stop at the same water reservoir, because when on these journeys they would stop at set designated reservoirs, and he said that the water would end up being less. because there's too many, both of our troops. So I thought, let us go first so you guys can have ease. Diplomacy, diplomacy. قال فلما رجعت. He says فلما لا رجعت إلي حين أتاك خبر موت أبي العباس. He says, in that case, when you came to learn of the death of Abu al-Abbas, why didn't you come to me? You didn't come back here. You went off. And he says, right. قال كرهت التضييق على الناس في طريق الحج. See, he uses the same excuse. He says, you know what it is? If I came to you and I've got all these troops with me, we're going to congest the streets. And he says, عرفت أننا سنجتمع بالكوفة. He says, I knew we will end up meeting in Kufa anyway, in Iraq. And he says, وَلَيْسَ عَلَيْكَ مِنِّي خِلَافٍ. Like, I'm not going to object to your being the caliph. قال فجارية عبد الله بن علي أردت أن تتخذها لنفسك. حساب كتاب نقطة چيني. This is, prior to the Hajj, there was Abdullah ibn Ali was another Abbasid. He's the uncle of Abu Ja'far al-Mansur. He had risen in rebellion as well against Mansur. So check this. Mansur had used Abu Muslim to crush him. He had said, can you please deal with him? And he did. He crushed him. And when he crushed him, he took, obviously, one of the concubines. So check this now. He's saying, oh, and you took the concubine of Abdullah ibn Ali for yourself. He says, قال لا ولكن خفت أن تضيع فحملتها في قبة ووكلت بها من يحفظها. He says, no. He says, I thought people might just mistreat her, so I put her in my kind of caravan and just took her for her safety. Political correctness. Political correctness. अच्छा. ثم قال له, he said to him, ألست الكاتب إلي تبدأ بنفسك والكاتب إلي تخطب آمنة بنت علي وتزعم أنك ابن صليط ابن عبد الله ابن عباس هذا كله. So what happens when he's talking? Mansur says to him, look, come close, hold my hand. Bonding, hold my hand. So he's holding, and Mansur has got his hand amongst his hands. And he's not letting go, and he's asking him these questions. He says to him, okay, he says, tell me, when you would write to me, you wouldn't seem to, it seemed to be more a bit egocentric. Tazkiyatun nafs going on, tazkiyatun nafs. And he says that you, and started to claim that you're the son of Salit ibn Abdullah ibn Abbas, like you're from our lineage. And you even proposed Amina bint Ali, his aunt, who's Abbasid, you proposed for her. So what Abu Muslim al-Khurasani does, you see, this is diplomacy, people. So obviously his hand is kind of sandwiched between his hands. Mansur's kind of got them like this, and he's asking these questions, being a bit awkward. So in between, Abu Muslim al-Khurasani says, look, I apologize, Your Excellency. And he kisses his hand. Kya baat hai, kya baat hai. Honestly, style. It is stylish. Every time you'd bring something like that up, and his hand is caught there anyway, he'd say, it was my mistake. And then he would just kind of kiss his hand. And so this is going on, right? So then he says to him, he says, ما حملك على مراغمتي ودخولك إلى خراسان. He says, why did you head back towards Khurasan? He says, خفت أن يكون دخلك مني شيء فأردت أن أدخل خراسان وأكتب إليك بعذري. He says, no, look, I thought maybe there was some mistaken bad blood. And I thought, let me go back to Khurasan, then I'll write to you. Now here, there used to be a leader from the Abbasid that was in Khurasan. They would call him Sheikh al-Qawm. His name was Sulaiman ibn Kathir. Abu Muslim had killed him previously. Here he asks him, Lima qatalta Sulaiman ibn Kathir. He says, why did you kill Sulaiman? And he says, وَكَانَ مِن نُقَبَائِنَا نُقَبَائِنَا وَدُعَاتِنَا قَبْلَ. Because he was like from the classics, and they used to call him Shaykh al-Qawm. He goes, why did you kill him? And he says, you see, this is the point. He gives that, he says, Arada khilafi. He says he started to disobey me. So at this point, Abu Ja'far al-Mansur, and he's holding his hand, remember, he says, Wayhak. He says, damn you. He says, you disobey me. And he says, and people who disobey you, you get killed. But yet, whilst you disobey me, don't you deserve to be killed? And as he does that, he kind of does that click, or some say he kind of taps this pole, or some say it may have been a clap. He does that. And as soon as he does that, the guards come in and unleash. He has these, some say 4 or 5 guards waiting behind these kind of curtains. They come straight in and just strike with their swords at Abu Muslim al-Khurasani, and they continue to strike. They say he obviously fell dead. They sliced him into pieces. And they say, whilst it's happening, Mansur is yelling, well, Mansur yasih, wayhakum udrubu qata Allahu aydiyakum. He's saying like, hurry, cut him up. He's kind of saying these things, and says, thumma dhabahuhu and waqata'uhu qit'an thumma ulqiya fi Dijla. And they threw him in the Tigris River. Now, and you can see this is a part of it as well. And they say that just as he had done that, somebody that was actually close to Abu Muslim and was from the Abbasid had come. He just made it to the palace. He'd heard Abu Muslim had come. And he goes to Mansur. He says, listen, Abu Muslim's coming. I just want you to... He was trying to kind of negotiate. And Abu Ja'far says to him, too late, mate. And he goes, what do you mean? And he just kind of looks at these cut pieces in this kind of leather wrap that they have, which are like human pieces. And he says, that's him. And this, you see, was what lied right there in front of them. That not only this waste of life, but this young man in his late 20s was the determining force that actually crowned the Abbasid dynasty. How he rose just suddenly in his late teens, this meteoric rise, and within a decade kind of collapsed, having left in his wake also 500,000 corpses and the ruins of the Umayyad dynasty, and how he met his own demise. It's such shocking stories that you see really echoing in light of that verse, وَتِلْكَ الْأَيَّامِ نُدَاوِلُهَا بَيْنَ النَّاسِ. And those days we rotate them amongst people. And how these great mighty people crossed path, whether it was going to be people of literature like Abdul Hamid al-Khatib, whether it was people of dynasty like Marwan al-Himar, and people like Abu Muslim al-Khurasani, and so intelligent as well. They say that after him, people of Khurasan were still they had so much allegiance to him that Mansur tried to first of all fake a letter from his stamp, that people would carry this kind of ring with a seal on it. And they used his ring to feign a letter back to Khurasan saying, look, I'm going to stay here and I'm going to send somebody else. He's going to be in charge. But as soon as it got there, the recipient said, this is fake. And do you know why? Check this out, the genius of Abu Muslim al-Khurasani. He had told his kind of deputies always in Khurasan, you see, whenever he writes a letter and he would seal it, he would only seal half. Like he would, like, let's say this was the letter and you put the seal on, he would only always tilt it. So it would be half a seal. But people wouldn't know this. And he'd always told them, if a full seal ever comes to you, no, it's not me. What a genius. So when they saw the full seal, they said that nah, we don't believe that. This cannot be him. Something's wrong. Then then Mansour eventually had to reconquer them, and it leads to the whole thing, which he manages to eventually. But this was this individual who was a nobody, yet such a powerful figure. And you can see here these poems as well that that some people obviously addressing Mansour, that زعمت أن الدين لا يقتضي فاستوفي بالكيل أبا مجرمي سقيت كأسا كنت تسقي بها أمر في الحلق من العلقم. That you see, Mansour, to justify it to the people, because people did love Abu Muslim, he justified it with this speech of his, and you can see it's here as well. I've put it here. He says that منصور خطب في الناس بعد قتل أبي مسلم فقال أيها الناس لا, he says لا تنفروا أطيار النعم بترك الشكر, and he tells them, look, don't be ungrateful, فتحل بكم النقم, that lest you too fall victim to consequences. And he mentions that, look, he goes on to say that that we basically ruled with a law, that he says, look, ما ذكرتم فضل ومن نازعنا هذا القميص أوطعنا رأسه. That he mentions that we had this rule amongst us, the Abbasids, that any uprising would be crushed. And Abu Muslim pledged his allegiance with this law. And it is by that law that he got executed, that those who live by the sword die by the sword. And he had promised that whoever rises against the ruler deserves to be executed. So this was his speech to people, Mansour's. But in it, you saw, and you can see there that, look, I put a poem of Firak Gorakhpuri ke maut ka bhi ilaj ho shayad, zindagi ka koi ilaj nahi. Allah, that maut ka bhi ilaj ho shayad, that maybe death actually has a cure itself, but life, there is no cure to life. Zindagi ka koi ilaj nahi. People, I want to share that story with us, the vicissitudes. Now, whether you see that as a celebration or a travesty, it is a matter of perspective. On one hand, this person conquered what nobody before him could have. He achieved what they couldn't have achieved. But then, on the other hand, he, met his tragedy awaiting him, as it's been said that we often meet our fate on the path we take to avoid it. Allah. وَتِلْكَ الْأَيَّامِ نُدَاوِلُهَا بَيْنَ النَّاسِ. So I thought I'd share that with you guys. Cool. Let's move on. Take a look at some of your questions. I'll share the link. Get some of you on some calls. And yeah. There was, by the way, he did say, just to squeeze that in at the end, they say Abu Muslim, when he heard like the people coming out with the swords, he did say to Mansour, he said, Istabqini li'a'da'ik ya Amir al-Mu'mineen. He said, keep me for your enemies, O Caliph, ya Amir al-Mu'mineen. And Mansour said to him, he said, وَمَنْ أَعْدَى عَلَيَّ مِنْكَ. And he said, who is a more deserving enemy to me than you? But he was a legend. But this is the thing, you see. I guess legends get cut down because it's they were all in their own way kind of just vicious characters, and where you have so many, obviously the question is there a main character? Who is the main character? Allah, Allah, Allah fi ashabi. By the way, this term sahaba, it is introduced, like we use it now to mean for the Prophet, but originally it was used to describe the companions of Mansur. The Sahaba were not the Sahaba of the Prophet, they were the Sahaba of Mansur. So the first time this word is used, it is Ibn Muqaffa writes a Risala describing the called something as Sahaba, but it's not talking about the Sahaba of the Prophet, that this word wasn't used for them at that time. People might say Ashabun Nabi or Sahbun Nabi, but they wouldn't say Sahaba. This word was used originally to describe the companions of the Abbasid caliphs. Then Muslims used it later to refer to the companions of the Prophet. I thought that's just an interesting, a piece of some trivia to know. Right. Yeah. Look at this. It's true. It's true. So it was supposed to be. All right, let me share the link. Get this out there, people. Where's the link? It is interesting. I do love these stories, I must say, I was really curious that I wonder what Abdul Hamid Al Khatib wrote in those. he wrote, prepared this whole thing that whoever reads this, it's a done deal. And Abu Muslim just sets it on fire. What does Mutanabbi say? That was sayfu astaqu anba'an min al-qalam. He said that basically the sword is mightier than the pen. That's how he says it. Mufti, why do, first of all, shukran, Icy Saracen, much love for the super chat. Why do some Muslim communities uphold shame culture and honor killings? Does it have its root in Islam or pre-Islamic culture? Right. So yes, first of all, we need to condemn any kind of honor attacks, honor killings, honor violence, shame culture. This is nothing to do with Islam. But like many things, people can shroud it in Islamic rhetoric. So it's not difficult. Look, a person can take the Quran and use it to justify any kind of means. So let's say you had all kinds of crazy sects in the past that did things like the Khawarij, who were like the forerunners to ISIS. They would butcher people and really ruthless. They would use certain verses of the Quran to try to twist it towards their meaning. So it's like they attacked Sayyidina Ali radiallahu anh, and Muawiyah, and they said that all of you have become kafir, and they used verses of the Quran to justify in al-hukmu illa lillah, that you two are trying to have a truce where really only God is the true judge. And so people can use the Quran or use Islam. It's a bit like saying how Bush used the American Constitution to justify his enemy combatant state, and try to justify Gitmo, Guantanamo Bay, on the back of the American Constitution. So a person can use anything and twist it to say, well, I'm using, it's like how Putin was now, before invading, he used a alleged democratic process to say, well, now the upper house in Russia has authorized me, following our democratic process, to do this. So people may say this has nothing to do with Islam. nothing. Islam abhors and condemns this shame culture, this kind of shaming, name and shame, this kind of honor attacks, all of this. It is just insecure people, and it very like so. So, for example, people will hold like what do like if you take a look at like let's say romance is demonized in some parts of the Muslim world, like having being in love with someone is demonized, like if you're not married yet. So even if let's say the person now came to propose but it became known that oh he likes her, it's like no, this is now a dishonor. Like I mean what goddamn millennium are you guys living in? Like that was never the case. Like in even in Jahiliyyah Arabia and in Islamic Arabia in the time of the Prophet, these things, marriage was such a natural thing. It was never like this. It was never like that. Like they marriage and love and divorces, and they would have divorces and marriages straight away, and they weren't tarnished. There was none of a lot of this. There seems to be a heightened attitude towards sexuality, especially in the Desi world, which is not really doesn't come to us from Islam, because the Islamic literature seems to be much more emboldened and kind of brazen in its attitude towards sex. So, in fact, we don't even dare translate how it's said because it's too kind of appears vulgar. But in Arabic, it just appears normal. So they treated like sex was a very natural state to them. So now in pre-Islamic Arabia, they wouldn't have, sure, they would have had their own social kind of thing. So maybe they looked down on, for example, slaves. So if a woman had an affair with a slave, then that may have been seen. Or maybe they saw it as a certain, because the tribe was an inferior tribe. They maybe saw that, but it wasn't the fact that she was, for example, having this romantic affair with someone that was itself seen as like, oh my god, that's so disgusting, or that's. I mean, I'm not saying maybe they didn't celebrate it, but they weren't. It wasn't a big deal for them. These things weren't how they saw it. Sure, maybe if she, they had other rules, and I don't believe that they had stoning. This was not from pre-Islamic Arabia. This was from the Jewish things. So the Arabs wouldn't have had that. They would have had the lashing and stuff. So they would have lashed people, but they wouldn't have stoned them. This was not an Arab custom mainly for things like that. I'm not saying. Obviously, people knew how to pick up stones and throw them at people. They understood that, but it wasn't like you go and stone somebody for having a sexual encounter with. So that was not generally, as far as I'm aware, known as an Arab custom. That was something that was in the Torah and in from the Jewish customs. And even the Jews didn't really do it in Arabia. So maybe the odd Jewish thing, because even in the Hadith, the Jewish people are practicing something else. They're kind of blackening the faces and putting them on donkeys when they catch them doing adultery and making them go around. So they're not actually doing things like the stoning. And in fact, that's where they come to the Prophet saying, well, look, in the famous Hadith that we only judge by our book. And the Prophet saying, well, that's double standards then, because your book says something else. So because they're saying we're going to blacken the face and put them on a donkey and I think shave his head or whatever, and then they make this statement about we only go by our scripture, and then the Prophet says, well, but that's not in your scripture. This doing the donkey thing and doing all isn't your scripture about stoning. And so this is the kind of the double standard and the hypocrisy that the Prophet is pointing out to them, that but you guys, sure, but why are you claiming that you only stick to scripture then? So this is but this whole culture is a very backwards, nothing to do with Islam. And you'll see different cultures, Muslim cultures, are very open to so many things. Like, it's a good example contrasting something like Afghanistan, Pakistan, those areas with something like Mauritania, because like Mauritania is going to be, both ends are hyper religious, let's say, or I don't know if hyper religious is the right word, but both ends have religion is the strong current that permeates their entire society. But yet the manifestations are so different. Like, if you take Mauritania, take this relationships as an example. Women will, throughout their lifetimes, have multiple marriages, and it's like a social status symbol. So if a woman, in fact, you can go onto YouTube and watch a drama on it. I mean, you can watch a documentary on it. So women will kind of, in their way, they'll kind of shame, or not shame, but they'll mock a woman who's only ever had one marriage in her life. Like, they'll be like, ha ha ha, well, she's only ever had one man. And there'll be women on average will go through at least 10 marriages. There's somebody that will, this one lady speaking about how she's been through 40 marriages. She's like really boastful that I had 40 marriages. And there's things where they will be like the husband and wife. There was an incident where the husband and wife were like, oh look, they're not really getting on. So she says, look, you know what, I think, and he says, I think we should just divorce or whatever. And she's like, yeah, that's great. And she says, do you think your friend, I kind of, is he up for marriage? And then he sets her up, says, yeah, of course he is. So she then marries the friend. And this is a very, now, you see, if I describe these practices to you, you're going to, like a stereotypical kind of profiling thing is, if I tell that to, let's say, people in Pakistan without describing who the culture is, they're gonna picture something. Oh, these are these lewd Europeans, kuffar, got no value for God, got no value. How can a woman want to be with 20 men throughout her life? How can a woman? And then you tell them, no, this is Mauritania, where children memorize the Quran and everybody's a hafiz of the Quran, and they do hijab, and they've got mashayikh, and they're deeply rooted in Maliki fiqh, and all they know is fiqh, and they memorize poems, and they some of the best kind of memories that we've got in the entire Arabic world. And they won't be able to, like, there'll be like a system malfunction. Like, they won't be able to understand that. How does that happen? Because to them, they think, like in, let's say, the eastern part, that their sexual sensitivity must be, which is so, these kind of insecurities that they have, they don't think they're insecurities. They think they're heightened sexual sensitivities and taboos must be rooted in their Islamic identity. This is what they assume. So if you, thereby, the corollary that follows, the logical conclusion is that if you are Islamic, you too must have these values embedded. But if they were to find a society that was arguably more Islamic than them, because unlike them, they actually all almost memorize the Quran, and they all understand Arabic, and they memorize Maliki fiqh, and they teach some of the greatest kind of memories on earth. They study hadith. I mean, this is the common people. You'll hear stories of women saying, well, I won't even marry a guy who hasn't, like, if the guy hasn't even memorized these poems on grammar and so on, then what a failure. It's like how people would say, does he not have a degree? They would say, does he not know Alfiyat ibn Malik? He doesn't even know that. So if you tell them that these women have, or this society is even more Islamic, but yet their attitudes towards sex and relationships are entirely different, they won't be able to fathom that. Because what's the alternative? Because where are you getting your sensitivities and this from? Because you're getting them not then from Islam. You're getting them from some insecurities that you have that are kind of cultural insecurities, and that nobody wants to admit to. You see, people feel bad saying this is an insecurity. They justify it by saying, no, this is a religious good act. That this is, as people say, the youth, the youth, the people who don't, they don't be jealous over their women, and the youth. Now, you hear this often amongst our Salafi brethren using this term, that the youth. Now, so the Mauritanian mashayikh, all these people, they're probably considering them the youth then. But that said, speaking of these Salafi, the divorces happen just the same amongst them. They marry these women, divorce them, pass them around, and utterly destroy the woman by the end of the process. So there is a lot of unpacking and unwrapping to do. And one thing we learn is that culture is not coming from religion. If anything, the religion will take the flavor of the culture that you have. And I love what Sheikh Umar Farooq Abdullah had said, that he gave this example. I heard it years ago in his lecture series. I think it was on the four madhabs, where he said that Islam is like a stream, like a river, and the water just takes the color of the riverbed. So that's what Islam does. It just kind of flows over, taking the kind of reflecting the properties of its environment that it's passing through. I thought that was epic. When will you throw Dr. David Wood under the bus? I already have videos about David Wood. So they're quite old, actually. You can watch them. These Mauritanian women must be rich. Don't judge them. That's a bit judgmental. Let people live. Do you think people value their cultures more than religion? That's a difficult one. I don't think they value their culture more than religion. I think what happens is to the common... See, you have to understand that common people are not deep thinking people. If you are somebody that has a propensity to think deeply, profoundly, and critically, then no, you are from a tiny proportion of people. You are the exception and not the norm. Most people are not like it doesn't mean people will assume binaries. They'll think, well, oh, if you're not that, then you must be stupid. You're not stupid. Like, people are not stupid. They're, in fact, very clever, and they're very dexterous, very skillful in their own way, and they're not dumb. But just because they're very dexterous and skillful and they can navigate through life, like somebody could be a mechanic and he could be really clever and he could fix things, and he knows, you bring him a car and he can figure it out. And in fact, today I had, for the first time, car problems. And and I called a friend, and he, so skillfully, it's like the gear selector wouldn't select. And I was just like, whoa, I was just parking up and I was kind of still out, and the car's just like, it's just in park. It doesn't, it's like, great. I was like, oh, this is going to be fun. Oh, it was wonderful, honestly. You got to laugh at these things. But people, you see, they have great skill. So people are like this. Some people could, like, you see people coding software, and you're like, what the hell? How can a person even do that? But they can do it. And you think, this person is a genius, and they are in that. But that doesn't mean that they are trained in critical, reflective, profound thought. It doesn't mean that, because they could just be really good at what they do and they navigate through life, and that's good enough for them. So there's good enough reasoning, like reasoning, everyday reasoning, like, should I buy that product? Should I buy this product? I'm going to do some evaluation. That kind of reasoning is good enough to get by with in life. To actually think about life with a capital L, to delve into an existential substrate and to think, well, what does this mean? And profound, like let's say I shared this the other day, that as a thought experiment, if I was to say, well, answer, like, think about who am I, without answering your name, without answering your relationships, without answering your career or qualifications or assets, that who am I? Think about that. Think about it when you're on your own sometimes. That is really profound, because it's not, you don't know, like, what the hell am I then? That kind of thinking at that level is incredibly rare and exceptional. If you find yourself like that, you are from a tiny minority of human beings. So at that level, see, most people are not thinking at that level. So culture and stuff like this, I think they find it difficult to separate stuff, because they're not thinking at the substrate level. They just think, so maybe a lot of things, they see culture and religion as like a Venn diagram and overlapping on most things, and they don't think so profoundly. So they just go with the flow, and that's actually surprisingly most people. So yeah, let's see. Saudis definitely take geopolitics. Don't know what that question means. I want my iman back. I went from mu'min to Muslim. How do you recognize truth from falsehood? Kya baat hai. I'll tell you what, have I shared the link? Let me share the link and people can come on. Nora, Ramadan coming up. Any advice for new Muslims? Oh, shukran, much love for the super chat. Yeah, what I would say is that, it is a personal, the thing about Ramadan is real, the thing about fasting, sorry, is that it's truly a very personal experience. Nobody seeing you can even tell that you're fasting, because it's a negation of action, it's a cessation, it's not actually enacting something. So it's the absence of food and drink, not, so people can't tell. So this is why it's so profoundly linked to the divine. And there is something about being in that state that evokes a heightened level of consciousness, or alters consciousness. So yeah, so I would say, look, see it as an opportunity, see it as a chance to maybe reconnect. Maybe if people can, first of all, with the fast, hopefully they will now become somewhat shorter. First, in some parts, they were like at least 16 hours plus. Now, if they're too long, there are different opinions that some people, and they're all fatwas, all from ulama, and you don't have to follow them. But if other people follow them, that's their choice. You follow the one that you see fit, and it's your devotion to God. So one is from end to end. There's one where people will give a fatwa that they can delay, for example, eating up until just before sunrise, and then up until sunset. In some places, people will say that, well, they will time it because it's over 15 hours. Anything over, I think they've said, like, the fatwa they give, like anything like 15, 16 hours, something like that. The certain ulama had said they could just allocate a time. So, for example, they're just going to fast 13, 14 hours in a day, and they set the time. So you get, this is from Al-Azhar and different places. So people will just set a time, like let's say they start fasting at 5 a.m. and they open it, or they start at 4 a.m. and they open it at, let's say, 6 p.m. or something, 6:30 p.m. or something like this. But this is to do with the actual fast. There are a variety of rulings, and people, it's their personal journey. What they take is up to them. You focus on yourself and what you're taking. The other thing is, it is an opportunity to remind ourselves of some discipline. Whilst we're doing that, if we can engage in some reading, if you can read the Quran, I would say that's amazing. If you can't, even if you can read, somebody's very new, maybe they can just read a line, a verse a day, even anything that they can acquaint themselves with and maybe just ponder over is huge. Maybe if they're absolute new Muslims, they could take the month to maybe learn the alphabet of Arabic. And so by the end of the month, that I know how to the alphabet, identify the letters, to join the letters, to read the letters as words, and to be able, so you set yourself a goal that within 30 days this is done, because the 30 days are going to be done anyway, so why not leave it with now this new skill? That would be wonderful. And I would also say to people, and this is to everyone, you can use it, maybe see it as an opportunity, a springboard to, if you are a victim, suffer from things like smoking cigarettes and you wanted to leave, people who smoke weed and they want to leave, they want to quit it but they can't, people who do things, maybe people who drink alcohol and they don't really want to, maybe people who want to quit something. This gives you the script, which gives you the power to do it. But you have to believe in yourself. The verse we read today, the antumul a'lawna, you will triumph, but in kuntum mu'minin. But you have to believe the script. You have to believe, change that inner script and believe it. That this is the month I'm going to get this done. And you can do it. Believe me, willpower, you underestimate human willpower. When put to the test, humans will always surprise you. So people think, I can never quit this, I can never quit weed, I can never quit cigarettes, I can never quit it. If you want to. Sure, some people don't want to. Maybe a person does something, maybe a person does gambling and they want to quit that. That's highly addictive. It's an opportunity. Don't think of it like a stick, the stick and the carrot thing. See it more as like, wow, I've got a window here where I've got a pretext to try to do this anyway. So, what if, I can get it done? It's like, yeah, why not, huh? And try to avoid being judgmental, because we say this, and it's one of the things that, I think Ramadan is a beautiful example of where we have to remember the fast is not, the hadith says that anybody who engages in just gossip and backbiting and insulting people and hating on people and doing stuff, and then the hadith says all they did, they never fasted, all they did was just starved and dehydrated. That's what the hadith says, that's not a fast. Because the fast isn't like, what does God get if you don't eat food? It doesn't. How does it help God by you not eating food? If anything, it helps you physically by kickstarting your immune system and stuff. But how does it help God? It doesn't. You're just exercising restraint. Why are you exercising restraint? What's the purpose? Because that is what kickstarts discipline. And the whole purpose was to create discipline. It wasn't to starve. What's the point of starving? And so purpose was, Allah was teaching you that you need to be disciplined. So, hey, here's a month. Try to inculcate some serious discipline and then let it play out for the rest of the year. May Allah make it easy. Right, so right, there you go, people. What we'll do is I've shared the link and then we'll wrap this up. Okay, we could actually start wrapping it up actually. Yeah, it has been an interesting day, I must say. Ya salam. There's so often I see. It's the same thing. I will have so many things that I need to do, and then I get distracted, and then I always think, look, we'll just start again. It doesn't matter. Just keep, yeah. Shukran. Right, okay, cool. Where can we join your live? Well, I've shared the link here in the chat. There you go. Is it not showing up? There it is. It's showing up now. So there it is. If anybody does want to jump on, they can do. If not, then we'll start wrapping up. And did I have a little poem or something here? Got Guman by Jaun Elia Sahib. Whilst we're waiting for anybody who wants to, you can just click the link over there and it should allow you to just join if anybody wants to join. Right, so दिल की तकलीफ कम नहीं करते, अब कोई शिकवा हम नहीं करते. That, the pain of this heart, it doesn't decrease, but now we don't complain. जाने जा तुझको अब तेरी खातिर, याद हम कोई दम नहीं करते. For your sake, my dear, we no longer remember you. क्या बात है. वो भी पढ़ता नहीं है अब दिल से, हम भी नाले को नम नहीं करते. जुर्म में हम कमी करें भी तो क्यों, तुम सजा भी तो कम नहीं करते. He says, why should we decrease the crime, our crimes? It's not like you're going to decrease your punishment. You're Jaun Elia. You gotta give it to him, huh? This is an epic one of his. कि काम की बात मैंने की ही नहीं, ये मेरा तोरे जिंदगी ही नहीं. He says what the real thing that I never even spoke about, the real objectives of life. He says it was never my style. मुझ में अब मेरा जी नहीं लगता, और सितम ये है कि मेरा जी ही नहीं. He says now like my heart, it's just not with it anymore. And the thing is, and it's not even up to me. There's many ways of interpreting that G here, that my life is not even my own, or my yes is not even my own, or my heart is not even my own. In another poem, he says, Zindagi kis tarah basar hogi, dil nahi lag raha mohabbat mein. Wah. He says, how will life get by? That I'm not feeling the love anymore. Like I'm not, like my heart no longer feels like it's not interested in romance or love. So how will this life now get by? हाय वो शौक जो नहीं था कभी, हाय वो जिंदगी जो थी ही नहीं. Wow. हाय वो शौक जो नहीं था कभी. He says, hi, which is a cry out, really. That passion that never was. Hi wo zindagi jo thi hi nahi. He says, oh, that life which never was. It's so hard-hitting, people. Cool. Shall we wrap this up then? I take it. And what I could do is go catch up on a quick episode of Before I Sleep. Mm-hmm. What's this? Romeo Pyar Dega. Bajre di roti te channa pariya dal da. Ka pee ke kenda maine tere naal da. Okay, sure. Right, so people, right, let's wrap this up then, people. All right, it's been quite an evening. As you can see, this in the words, what better than the words Sauda khuda ke vaste kar kissa mukhtasar, apni to neend ud gayi tere fasane mein. Allah. Sauda, Mirza Rafiuddin Sauda, contemporary of Mir. Yeah. Isn't it about him that somebody said that the kalam of Mir is ah, and the kalam of Sauda is va? That Sauda khuda ke vaste kar kissa mukhtasar, apni to neend ud gayi tere fasane mein. He says, for the love of God, Sauda, now wrap up this story of yours. Listening to this saga, we've lost our sleep. So people, it's been awesome. It's been epic. I think some amazing discussions. Schadenfreude, the vicissitudes of fate, what that means, success, failure, how it's a perspective, how I guess the kind of almost like one could say the default mode network of existence is at a set at suffering, but really at an individual level, it is our meaning that determines whether it is suffering or whether it's contentment or whether it's joy. Or, so that's a profound thought. And also then the Quranic guidance, verses 139 from Ali Imran, verse 140, speaking of the vicissitudes of fate and strength and the inner script, to the rise and tragic fall, to determination, loyalty, and betrayal, instantiated in the epic of Abu Muslim Al-Khurasani. So guys, with that, let's wrap it up. It's been awesome. If you haven't already liked and subscribed, do so. And, click the, you know how to do it. Click the icon as well. People click kar liya karo yaar. Abhe kuch nahi jata. You need to like and spread the love. See, this is actually a good litmus test to see how people hold back. Oh. But yeah, if you want to reach out and connect, Instagram's always a good place to do that. If you want to show some extra love, you can always head over to Patreon. Show wahan pe, actions speak louder than words on Patreon. And we do have our one-to-one perspective sessions with Patreons, We also have different. We have like a monthly session, and you have the Discord server as well called Mindscape. And some people had asked me about the Discord server for the book lounge, and I feel that that had see the book lounge. We are accepting people, but it's through kind of interview because it requires commitment. I'm only prepared to accept people who are heavily committed to reading, and it's a must. They have to read every month, no exception. Right? You must read the entire book, and you must attend the meeting at the end, which will be live streamed. There's no buts, ifs, no, anything short of near death is inexcusable. So I do have a very, as you can see, zero tolerance policy. I think I must have chucked off 100 candidates, if not. So because you see, it's the Lucifer effect in psychology. What Doctor, what's his name? Blah, 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 blah. Oh bloody hell, Zimbardo. Anyway, right. So what he's clearly shown in the Lucifer effect, you see, it's the one bad apple. You get a few people, they don't participate, it rubs off on the others. So people have to participate. And this is why I'd rather just be very strict with people. And then if people want to join it, then it's awesome and epic, and they can be epic. And we obviously have an excellent vibe. So right now we've got a great cohort. We've got like a great group of people who, great dynamism, great energy, and they read. We even like this month when we just 6, I think, then maybe we had 7 in between, but 6 people really on the session. Qualitative feel excellent, people participating, and you get used to the people, they carry on, and it's amazing. You look forward to what they're going to say. So I like it, and I like that, and I'd rather just have commitment and quality over quantity. So yeah, so that's for the book lounge. People were asking. Guys, we were wrapping up. Chalo, there's somebody's popped on up. Shall we admit this guest before we leave? Let me see then. I've got to bring on. Where's the earphones? All right, let's see. We've got a Shahbaz Khan. Shahbaz Khan, aa jao phir yaar kya. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah. How are you?
I'm good, Shahbaz. Gee, where are you calling from?
I'm calling from Canada. I'm in Calgary, Alberta.
Calgary. Wow, kya baat hai yaar.
Yeah.
That's epic. All right. I must say, a lot of Canadians do tune in. There's a lot of love that resonates from Canada.
Oh yeah,
Right
definitely.
back at you guys, man. It seems like an amazing place, I have to say.
It is. It definitely. Except for the weather, everything else is good.
Yeah, that's true. The warmth. The warmth. वो दिल में होनी चाहिए. It should be in the heart.
Exactly.
What's the
word.
weather outside? As long as you've got the warmth in your hearts, that's what counts.
Exactly.
So talk to us, Shahbaz, man. What's on your mind? Any thoughts? What would you like to share with
I
us?
was wondering, we even need to go to Jannah, right?
Sorry, you froze. Not just the weather, but you froze.
I don't know if you can hear me, but
I think you.
I guess I'm
I
just
think
gonna...
wait there. I think you're back. I think you're reconnecting. Wait there. So, ho jata hai. This happens sometimes. Just as see, Shahbaz was trying to ask such an important question, and the internet just cancelled him. Say no to cancel culture, people. Otherwise, you end up with this. Shall I? Do you want to add yourself again? I'll remove you, and you can add yourself again, and maybe that might make it a better connection. So let me try to remove you. you try to join again, it might be that for some reason. That said, I think even here the internet was playing up for a couple of days. So what it's an amazing, beautiful quote. I searched for God and found myself. I searched for myself and found God. Wow. So hypnotically amazing. Wow. So true, so true. Right. Okay, I take it. Nope, I think Shahbaz has, unfortunately, I think the weather may have got the better of. So, guys, we did try. I think with that, let me just check. Yeah, it's okay. We'll give about 2 more minutes and then we'll wrap this up. I'll check the comments till then. Tell them to do murga, right? So I don't know what that's talking about. Right, sure, guys. Anyway, yep, I'll leave you guys with that. Do also, yeah, I'm hoping to get some mind traps in pretty soon. There've been quite a few piled up actually, and I've just had stuff going on, and therefore kept postponing. And so, inshallah, let's see. We might be able to get one out tomorrow. This week has surprisingly just got a bit hectic, but I guess there's always the fun in that. Guys, take care of yourselves wherever you are. وأوصيكم أن تتفانوا بحب الله قبل أن تفنوا بحكم الله. والسلام الله عليكم وخدا حافظ.